All right. Okay, good morning, Amy. You want to take over and drive?
Sure. Good morning, Amy. Good morning, folks. We initially had our time together just to spend with underneath it to talk through where we are and what we're working with. At the same time, the accessory development unit ordinance and revision is coming through, and so planning folks wanted to make sure that we had an opportunity to hear from that and hopefully be able to send our support as the planning board reviews this, and then that goes to council. And so I thought it appropriate that we have that be presented to us on the beginning of this call. Presented at the beginning of our meeting, and give us opportunity to ask questions. Because of the numbers, Marla, I would say once we hear this, if we want to draft something, that we send something to the full coalition to get their information via email or some sort, so that the planning board can have that, since we don't have a voting form.
Okay.
But with that, I'll kick it to you, Amy.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Amy Crum. I'm a principal planner with the Planning and Development Services Department, and I lead the Comprehensive Planning and Design team. And we were charged with looking at our accessory dwelling unit ordinance provisions. So I'm going to share my screen here. All right, everyone see my screen?
Yes.
Good, okay. So just to make sure everyone's on the same page, accessory dwelling units are small secondary dwelling units on the same lot as a principal structure that have the same amenities as a standard house. They're often referred to as granny flats or carriage houses, in-law apartments, and they can be either attached to the principal, as in like a basement apartment or an addition, or they can be a standalone structure. There's multiple benefits to accessory dwellings. They increase the range of housing options available to meet differing income and generation needs. They provide options for aging in place. They generate income and promote economic stability for the property owner. They allow for flexibility and infill development while retaining the scale and character of a neighborhood. And they serve a range of different populations, from young professionals to people with disabilities and senior citizens. The Legacy 2030 Comprehensive Plan promotes the use of ADUs to support infill development, particularly in growth management areas 2 and 3, as well as gentle density in age-friendly communities. Over the past several years, several national organizations have promoted the benefits of ADUs, such as the National Association of Home Builders, AARP, and National League of Cities. And then, as I'm sure you all are aware, the Winston-Salem Forsyth County Housing and Needs Assessment identified the use of ADUs as a means to help create a better balance between housing units produced and household size. In fall of 2020, Council asked staff to research the best management practices for ADUs. Staff presented their findings in April of 2021. There were 5 key best management practices that we were able to identify across a national level. One is to allow all types of accessory units and simplify the building permit process, require no additional parking spaces, minimize permanent impact fees or just waive them altogether in certain situations, and adopt flexible and simple regulatory requirements. Generally, the current trend with ADUs has been to allow for a broader allowance of them and an expansion of the permitted location. And this is across the state as well as across the country. 2 good state examples of this would be the Raleigh amendment that was done in 2020, and then Wilmington just amendment their land development code in August of 2021. There have been 4 states nationwide that have actually adopted statewide ordinance provisions allowing for accessory dwelling units on single family lots, and that is Oregon, New Hampshire, Vermont, and California. ADUs have been allowed by Winston-Salem zoning ordinance since as early as 1930. However, they were subject to occupancy requirements, and this is for individuals who are relatives, adopted persons, servants, individuals who are over 55 or handicapped. And under these provisions, an attached ADU required a staff approval from zoning staff, and the detached ADU required a Board of Adjustment approval. In September 2017, Council adopted a new version of the ordinance, which basically retained all the existing regulations, removed the occupancy requirements, and this was based off case law coming out of Wilmington at the time. And then, but most significantly is that they changed the approval process to a special use district rezoning process. And since this time, only one ADU has been fully approved. We actually had one ADU come before the planning board yesterday, and they recommended approval of that, and it will have to go before the city council for final adoption approval. And so when we looked at our provisions, we had basically three sort of main items that we wanted to stress. One was that we were maintaining the attached and detached distinction. Another is that we were making no changes to the county provision beyond some basic cleanup amendments. I believe the ordinance was sent out to you also. This was changes to the definitions and then changes to clarifying the first portion of section 5.3.1, changing director of inspections to director of development and planning and development services, things like that, really minor. And really our goal is to simplify the process and to bring our provisions in line with our peer communities. And I'll go through sort of the key elements and how these relate back to our peers as we go through. So the big one, sort of the big kicker here for what we're proposing is approval process change. Currently, like I mentioned, is special use district rezoning, and this is for both attached and detached ADUs within the city. This is about a 2 to 3 month process. There's $1,000 minimum fee, and this is based off acreage. So the larger the site, the more expensive it becomes. And it requires a site plan by a licensed design professional, which again is an additional fee attached to that. And it's an elected body approval process. So that means it is public hearings, both at the planning board and at the city council, and it requires public outreach. What we are proposing would be to change that to a permitted with conditions for both attached and detached ADUs. And that would basically require a zoning official approval. So essentially, if a property owner met the conditions of the ordinance, they would be approved by the zoning official in the department. So there'd be no elected body review at all. And if you look down on our 6 peer communities, you will see that all of them follow the same process. Principal use. Currently, principal use is not really specified. It's based off the opinion of the director of inspections, and our definitions basically state residential building, but doesn't really get into specifics of what that means. And so we're proposing actually specifying what the principal use would be. And for attached, that would be residential building, single family. And for detached, that would be residential, single family, and manufactured home class A. And if you look at our peer communities, you will see all of them basically allow for single family residential as a principal use. Raleigh and Durham go a step further. Raleigh allows for both single family detached as well as 2-unit living, so basically a twin home, to be allowed ADUs. Durham allows for ADUs on lots of 1 or 2 primary dwellings, as well as community service uses, which would be things like amphitheaters, community centers, food banks, and things of that nature. Regarding number of ADUs allowed, currently we allow 1 ADU per lot, whether that's attached or detached. We're proposing no change to this. Again, everyone basically, except for Durham, allows for 1 ADU per single family dwelling. Durham allows for 1 ADU per residential, and then 3 for those civic uses. Parking, currently we require 1 parking space. And then the parking has to be located on the same lot and served by the same driveway. We're proposing no parking requirement. And this goes back to those best management practices that I mentioned earlier, and really where the current trend is for ADU provisions. Looking at our peer communities, Asheville requires 1 parking space if it's required of the principal structure, and Greensboro requires one off-street parking space. Wilmington, to note, used to require in their previous version of the ordinance, their ordinance required 2 parking spaces per ADU. They have since gone to no parking requirement for ADUs with their recently adopted ordinance. Size, so currently for attached, it can be no more than 50% of the heated floor area of the principal building with 1,000 square foot maximum. Detached requires basically the requirements of the accessory structures, which is 5% of the lot, 25% of the rear yard, and that no matter what, you're allowed up to 576 square feet. For what we're proposing, no change for the attached. For the detached, we're proposing a 70% of the total floor area of the principal structure not to exceed 1,000 square feet, and then a 576 square feet, which shall be allowed regardless of principal size. And looking at our peer communities, they all sort of handle them a bit differently, but usually the maximums are somewhere around the range of about 800, 900 square feet for a detached ADU. We chose 1,000 square feet simply just for simplicity's sake, just keeping the attached and detached the same. Again, creating a simple ordinance to follow. Setbacks, attached ADUs currently have no provision associated for setbacks. Detached are the applicable requirements of accessory structures. You can see those right there. Basically both, no matter if you're an interior lot or corner lot, you have to be 75 feet from the front property line. And then for interior lots, it's 5 feet from side and rear. And then corner lots is 3 feet from side for side yard placement. And then it cannot extend beyond the front setback of the adjacent property for rear yard placement. What we are proposing is no change to the attached. For detached, we are proposing 2 separate setbacks for new construction and conversions. For new construction, that would be 5 feet from side and rear. Conversions would comply with the NC in North Carolina Building Code regarding setbacks, which I believe is about 3 feet, and essentially it's about fire safety. And we are providing a statement that they cannot be located in front of the front facade of the principal structure. And the reason for separating out conversions versus new construction is that it's something that Charlotte is actually dealing with right now, is that when you have a conversion of an existing structure like a garage that's perfectly legal, conforms to all requirements, and then you have a separate setback for an ADU that's greater, you're now creating a non-conforming situation. Nobody's going to move that building over. So you essentially get a backlog of variances, which is what Charlotte is experiencing now. So we wanted to avoid that. And looking at our peer communities, everybody sort of handles a little bit differently, but about 5 feet is roughly falls in line with everyone else. Height, currently there's no provisions associated with attached dwellings, and detached, again, meet the requirements of these accessory structures, which is 17 feet. We're proposing for attached, they cannot exceed the height of the principal structure. And for detached would be a 25-foot maximum. And this is about a 1.5 story building, roughly. And again, we're fairly in line with what our peers are doing. When we looked at this ordinance back in 2015, 16, and 17, we were actually proposing a 24-foot maximum. So we're sort of keeping it in line with that as well. A couple other notes. Attached, we are removing the structural requirements for prohibited alterations, access, stairways, and utilities. Essentially, reason why is that this gets into design, placement of doors, placement of stairs. It's very design based, which we are prohibited from looking at design of single family structures based off the state code. And a lot of the language is, where feasible, who decides where feasible is, that kind of language is sort of wishy-washy, and we don't really like to have that in the ordinance. And we don't get into utility placement, so it doesn't really need to be part of our UDO. We leave that to Duke Power and the utilities department to determine, if and when meters need to be present. And for detached, we are removing the allowance for manufactured home Class A and Class B to be used as an ADU. This is simply because of the size requirements. With a minimum size of 1,000 square feet. There frankly isn't a Class A or B manufactured home that meets that. Most, I think the smallest one they produce now is about 1,200 square feet. So it's sort of a moot point. So we're just going to remove it. And then we're adding a permanence provision, which requires that the ADU be placed on a foundation, and that it prohibits the use of RVs and trailers as an ADU. So essentially a property you can, put a pop-up camper in the back of their yard and call it an ADU. It would have to be on a foundation. To summarize, again, Legacy highlighted ADUs as a way to promote creative housing options that can accommodate the growing population and promote infill development, age-friendly communities, and gentle density. The Winston-Salem Forsyth County Housing Needs a Study identified the use of ADUs to create a better balance between housing units and household size. Only one ADU has been permitted under the current provisions. And we believe, planning staff believes that with this proposal, that it will bring our code in line with our peer communities. As Marla mentioned, our next steps would be to take this to the work session in City Community Planning Board work session in October, which is the 4th Thursday. They reviewed it in September, didn't really have a couple questions, but nothing major. So we'll take it back to them in October. We are advertising for a public hearing in November. If everything goes smoothly with that, it would tentatively go to the January City Council public hearing for adoption. So with that, I will answer any questions anyone has. Any questions?
Not sure I came in late, so apologies on that, but I'm not sure if you mentioned this at the start, but since this is an item that came out of this committee in terms of one of its main recommendations from the last years, kind of because of the accessory dwelling ordinance, our staff would definitely be appreciative if this committee wanted to formally endorse this proposal, so we could kind of have that in our pocket when we take it to the planning board and ultimately city council. As you all know, while a lot of the policymakers, council, the committee, others do support these types of provisions, we are going to probably experience some neighbors who may be concerned that we're turning their single-family neighborhoods into multi-family neighborhoods. And certainly, you all are the thought leaders on providing affordable housing policies for Winston-Salem. So I'll just throw that out there. This committee does feel comfortable.
I will say, I know John's not here, but John Lauer, wonderful, he did voice his support in terms of wanting the committee to speak on this. Some of essentially, I really just in your presence and being here, any commentary or partnership, if you have any thoughts or things to.
Sure. So good morning again, Amy. Amy and I met when she came here. So I think ADUs are a great idea, a great way to increase housing stock and talk about even maybe incentivizing them and giving people priorities for doing them and having them do affordable housing with it. So, saying we'd like you to do it, and if you do affordable housing, we'll make it even easier for you to do it. Because I know you guys are having, you're starting to get a little tight. And so while increasing the market share and the market supply is always good, but you also need to make sure that you're targeting the most vulnerable, and that's a good way to do it, right? Making sure that there's a process in place, and then giving additional incentives for affordable housing. That's something that you guys can talk about through your planning process, because there's no reason, in my opinion, to stop anything, and we do want to endorse pieces. And then always, as you're doing the data analysis, you're talking to community, you're seeing the pushback, and talking about your body of work, making additional recommendations. There's some really good examples of this. Denver, for example, provides only allows ADUs if they are going to do affordable housing, and they also provide some assistance with construction and things like that. That's how they tie them together. But that again, you guys don't have to get there yet. You can start as a when I work at our planning department, they like to build and start with the framework, and then make sure you get all the kinks out of it, and then go from there. So I think this is great, and I'm excited when Marla told me you guys are doing it. It's like, oh, okay. There's already some really great ideas that are, because sometimes best practices don't actually work everywhere. You know, they're good ideas. You want to explore them, you want to discuss them, but you do want to make you want the kind of work that Amy and her team have done. And then, yeah, you're going to have these conversations with the neighbors who are going to be directly impacted. You should also talk about short-term rentals and Airbnbs, because that's what folks are going to do with these. They just will. Not everybody, but so yeah, and so you need to be prepared for that. And what is you know, the larger community's feelings about these? I'm one of the few advocates who doesn't hate short-term rentals. I don't like Airbnb the company because they're really bad corporate actors, but short-term rentals in and of themselves don't have to be bad for a community.
Underneath that, I'll just say, first of all, I appreciate those comments, and we probably don't have the time to get into it now, but the planning board did ask staff about a year or two ago to actually look at short-term rentals and do kind of some policy recommendations on that. And basically, as a board, the planning board has similar views that they're not really opposed to the idea of short-term rentals and things of that nature. And we also kind of talked to our deputy city attorney, and you know, from his perspective, they're really not different from a legal perspective than a year lease on an apartment or a 6 months lease or something like that. So in the absence of a demonstrable problem in the community, our board recommended that we kind of just keep our finger on the pulse, but not really add any further restrictions on that element. But again, it's a great reminder for us and for you all to kind of keep an eye on that aspect, kind of the other side of the coin, once we get hopefully some more of these units in the community.
And, you know, also think about it too. You know, short-term rentals represent an additional revenue source. It would be real smart of you all to think about pigeonholing those fundings for affordable housing. It's difficult for a community to generate new revenue sources that aren't immediately gobbled up by other people. You can always make the argument that short-term rentals compete with long-term rentals, and any revenue generated should go to addressing the industry it directly impacts. So that is one reason why you see work, but you've got to be prepared, and you should have conversations, you know, with Airbnb about the taxes, because your hotels are going to start talking about this, right? They're going to be like, okay, there's unfair competition. Most communities, I'm not sure what you guys do with your hotel and motel taxes, or if you even have them as additional revenue sources. They're usually split between the city and the states and things like that.
There is a hospitality tax, but I don't know what.
It's an occupancy tax.
Yes.
But
Airbnbs don't
pay
pay
housing though.
Right. Well, but here's the thing: Airbnbs don't typically fall under those unless you all decide to make them applicable to them. So this is why the hotel motels complain about them, because they are given there's an advantage for staying in a short-term rental over a traditional hotel room. They could look identical, but it will actually be cheaper because you're not paying the taxes. So most communities find themselves having that hard conversation, either at the urging of their hotel motel association, or because they're like, wait a minute, we're leaving money on the table. And again, so what are you going to do with those revenues? And so it would be something that you guys would want to talk about that through this process, and say, listen, we do want to do this. You don't want to be hostile. You want to be, and you want to manage it. And it's a good way of keeping track of everything, because there are habitability requirements, you know, and one of the things that people struggle with is you start dealing more with the habitability issues of visitors, which is a bitter pill for community to accept, because now you're having these big consuming conversations, and they're usually driven by, again, the industry, right? Airbnb will come in and be like, oh no, we want to you know, they're gonna put a lot of pressure, they're gonna put out ads and things like that, and they're gonna wanna have a conversation and then, again, you wanna make sure that you're controlling the conversation, that you're prepared for it. You can invite them to the table and things like that. I'm gonna warn you right now, they're not good actors when it comes to working with citizens, with cities. They tend to come in and try to bully.
Yeah, I would just say in North Carolina, most cities are preempted in that conversation. State, and a lot of those conversations have happened at the state level in terms of Airbnb lobbying, particularly against the occupancy tax.
Yep.
And them being considered a bit different. I know a lot of those conversations have happened, but I know for particularly the larger cities, it will be a slippery slope for them regulating or attempting to add any additional regulation, because just the landscape of North Carolina right now, as soon as a larger city takes that action or moves towards doing something more restrictive, those folks run straight to Raleigh. And
right, but here's the other thing: you got another big schoolyard bully, the Hotel Motel Association, who are not without power and influence.
Yeah.
Your tourism industry. These are not disinterested and powerless folks when it comes to throwing down at the state legislature. They can and will help. Now, again, you all have to talk about what help looks like, because their help will look like, you know, what benefits the hotel motel industry, and they're closer aligned. Airbnb, BDRNO, and the hotel motel industry are becoming closer and closer. You know, to the detriment of your workforce sometimes. You know, a lot of the hotels are looking at, well, do I need to have people checking you in? Can we do this online? Can we use some of the features from Airbnb and BDRNO, reduce staff overhead and things like that? And so but again, in the initial offering, they are still on opposite sides, and so they can help.
How do you leverage their oppositional stances right now?
And that's what you guys have to discuss, right? You have to talk about through this process what it is that's best for the people, with their input, obviously, what's best for people of Winston-Salem. But again, looking at the framework that's coming in, the good things that are going to be built, and then making sure that you thought about the consequences, the unintended consequences, and game them out. So I think this is great. I wish ADUs are difficult, and part of the reason ADUs are difficult in a lot of places is because of Airbnb, right? Because they've got people have a knee-jerk reaction to them, and I think what you guys are doing here is putting together an excellent framework that you can build and increase market rate housing, housing at the low market, luxury housing, and if anybody wants to do short-term rental, they can. But again, the devil is in the details. Somebody's got to say, well, what are the different numbers that are needed or really allowable for those different categories? And that's the work that you guys are going to be doing long term.
And I just want to echo one more thing that you said, that in Louisiana, the planners you work for are the kind of builders, you said, they kind of do these ordinances and iterations, and we've taken that same tack here. We recognize this may not be everything that anyone could want, but we think this is a good first stab at the problem in a fair and equitable manner. And certainly, as our council and other policymakers have done on other issues, it's not set in stone. It's iterative, and we'll keep revisiting this as necessary.
I'm curious, because it seems to me that, you know, a lot of this is about maximizing flexibility and speeding the process along. And I don't know enough about manufactured housing, so maybe this is a naive question, but one of the things you mentioned, Amy, was pulling out some manufactured housing that's currently allowable. And with a lot of the innovation that's going on in that building industry right now, I'm wondering, are you limiting flexibility long term, or, and I don't know what those classes mean, but, you know, were something to come back into, you know, the other standards in those classes that are now, you know, with this revision would no longer be allowable. That makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, right now, I mean, when you look at manufactured homes, right now, it's really just a size issue that we could, and it's not, for an ADU, it's not really a city thing. It's more of a county, which they can still do in the county. They can still absolutely do that. That doesn't change anything from that. And, and also I think some people, there's a difference between manufactured home and modular. And sometimes people get that confused that, and modular homes are essentially treated the same as a stick-built home. So modular homes would still be, you could still have a modular setup. But yeah, I mean, I think, if somehow somewhere down the line there is a manufactured home that would meet the size requirement, I mean, and then there's a big push for people to use manufactured homes as an ADU within the city. I mean, we could absolutely, reinvestigate using that. So I don't think this precludes them from a change in the future per se. If somehow, the builders of manufactured homes change and they, make a smaller product somewhere along, and there's a demand for being able to use a manufactured home as an ADU within the city.
Yeah, I just had a quick, I'm sorry, I had to become Joe Cross. Missed the introduction, I apologize. We got my email.
We jump right into any presentation, so we did the introduction.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry. But I was just curious about defining short-term. When I came in, you were talking about short-term rentals, like it's a classification of rentals versus long-term. And I'm assuming long-term is anything a year out. Is the term long-term and short-term associated with numbers? Like 6 months is a short-term rental, 3 months is a short-term rental, or, are you talking a week or a month? I mean, I'm a little bit mixed up on what short-term rentals is versus.
Right, and sometimes having a big lease or not also factors into that.
Oh, really?
So with your short-term rentals, you generally don't have a lease.
Oh, I see.
Right,
So
and that's a part of it.
So if you have a 3 month or a 6 month rental and you have a lease for 6 months, that's not considered a short-term rental.
Not ordinary, because it's a contract.
Okay.
Okay. Normally it's different. Most rentals.
Right. Yeah.
And I have no responsibilities for anything but going to the property at all. I just occupied, I don't change a light bulb, right?
Right, and also they also provide basic services, right? Even you might have a short-term rental where someone is staying for 2 months, and you're giving them services like you're coming and cleaning your unit. It's kind of like, again, this distinction is that is this going to be your home versus are you visiting? Right, and so what that looks like. And again, some people will sign leases. You might stay somewhere for 6 months. Like, listen,
Right. I mean, that happens all the time in corporate life.
That's right. Those are different. But again, what we're talking about is that business, and we try not to use Airbnb. One, they're bad actors. Two, we don't want to turn them into Kleenex or Xerox. And even though they already kind of are.
And so, do we have regulations? I'm sorry, do we have regulations around short-term rentals in Winston-Salem or not? I mean, are we talking about whether that should be a part of the affordable housing mix at all?
Currently, the council and others have chosen not to regulate it separately. We just, again, kind of on the advice of our city attorney's office, other staff, kind of just see it as part of the whole spectrum of rentals and other things. We have standards for that, and that's defined differently what that short term is in each of those communities. They don't have that kind of problem.
All right, let's try to find out where we were.
It might be good to, put it on the table. I mean, especially, the example Angelica gave about, I'm bringing it back to ADUs, but just writ large, the notion of ADUs and affordable housing and incentives for that. Is there a way to get involved with the short-term rental market? Maybe have some kind of revenue stream attached to that can support other affordable housing objectives. No, but it might be something to kind of put into the mix in terms of our larger discussions around the housing plan.
I will add another way. It's kind of from just the staff initiative. If the city did decide to regulate outside that point of view, staff resources for that. Yeah, it's kind of another thing, someone would have to follow up and make sure those are kind of, late model.
Yeah, and that kind of gets to something, I think, we talked about this a few years ago, similar to the conversation we were having on source of income discrimination. The other conversation was around landlord licensing or rental registries, because that could be a way, you have to have a license in order to lease a unit. And part of what I've seen in some other communities is where, let's just say, you have a fee of $75 or $100 for an inspection and to get your certificate of occupancy. And that fee helps to offset the cost of staff doing the inspection and so forth. And you might get your place inspected, I'm just gonna say like in 3 years. Now, you could decide as a body, there might be, let's say you have 2 good inspections in a row, then maybe you don't have to have another one for 5 years, unless there's a code, right? So there could be a way where it may not seem as onerous to the property owners because it's not happening every year, and they don't have to pay that fee every year, but there's still a way that they're on the books, and who's out there renting, that those properties are up to having. So that's another possible way of addressing that. Say, static costs and so forth. So looking at the long term. One community. Is it Durham or is it Chapel Hill? Yeah, basically, they're the only ones who do it. But I guess they have to modify their fee.
Yeah, and this is a little different. I'm having that play, but every reason why.
And do it mean you can't charge a fee for.
You can't say it's not for a rental as a landlord. Yeah, one allow folks to know where how much the house program. But for some reason, I think we should put on the list of things that I think is not just for this year to discuss, but also in terms of how we go legislative action. Requires legislative action. It will require coordination of both parties. We're not going to know what. I actually have 2 questions on this before we get in reference to the minimum size, the 1,000 square feet. How was that?
How did we come up with the size for 1,000 square feet? That was the question.
Is that the floor to ceiling? Is that the?
Well, the 1,000 square feet, is currently for an attached dwelling. That's the limit. That's existing maximum there. So that's where we got the 1,000 square feet. Is basically just for a detached. Right now, there isn't a size associated really with it beyond. Sort of the 5% of the lot, 25% of, the rear yard. You can have, at a minimum, you'll always be able to have 576 square feet, which I think is that like a 2-car garage? There's a,
It's a 24 by 24 2-car garage where that dimension came from, 576.
Yeah.
That's the actual minimum.
That's the minimum.
Okay, all right. Okay.
Yeah. So, with the detached going forward, where our proposal is, we got the 1,000 square feet, just keeping it in line with the attached. Essentially, that's what is currently allowed for attached. We're not proposing any changes to that. And then just to, again, simplify the ordinance. And so essentially what would happen if somebody has an 800 square foot principal structure, they would actually be able to have, a little bit more than what the 70% would be. So they'd be able to have that 576. But once you hit about 1,500 square feet or 1,450 or somewhere in that range, that's when that starts to limit down. And, so that way you're not going to get that full 70%. Essentially, you're going to be capped out. So.
And then one other question I had in reference to it, Raleigh, I think it was either Raleigh or Durham, that they offered the ability for the civic use to have a group. And that's not something that's being suggested.
No, it's Durham that does that. We discussed it about including that with this round of change. But, at this point, we sort of kind of want to, get a provision, in order that works, that we could expand upon. And there hasn't really been any interest in providing ADUs with things like, food banks and community centers. That hasn't been broached with us. Churches actually isn't listed in that civic use with that. But, a lot of times there's other means by which that those principal uses can find ways of incorporating housing onto their lot, because usually their lots are large enough. So there's other avenues for them to work with. But, so at this point, we didn't feel a need to go down that road, but we did discuss it. And I think maybe if there's an interest in the future, that's something we could, obviously again, expand upon as a need presents itself to do that. And I think once we get a little bit more information on how things are working in Durham, that always helps too. They're sort of the first one to do that in the state. So we tend to like to see how things go in other places and learn from their successes or trials a bit and move forward that way. But, as of right now, we didn't feel the need to include something like that.
Appreciate it. One thing, thanks for the presentation and just additional commentary. The last kind of change turn that happened with this ordinance, I was on the council at the time, and I'll be very honest. At the end of the day, what was passed at that time was a political compromise with the neighborhood association. Essentially, they were against even seeing they didn't want the use at all to really exist. And essentially, what was done was what exists now, which allows it, but is extremely restrictive in terms of actually seeing it come to fruition, which is counterintuitive to the #1 goal of the city's strategic plan, which is creating additional affordable housing. So, at least from my perspective, anything that we can do to help endorse like this it would be helpful to the community as a whole of seeing more units come to the community. And I know we don't have the full coalition present to be able to offer a full endorsement of it, but I would like for us to maybe be able to get the summary of what we have and send that to the coalition as a whole, just simply saying that we desire to endorse this and ask if they're able to if we can get the full support from the coalition or majority support of the coalition, so that when they take this to the planning board for their meeting, that we can take our voices heard at the table. Thoughts or counter thoughts about
I think didn't we draft a letter at one point support?
We drafted a letter when they
circulate that to the committee again.
Yeah, last summer.
Use that format.
Yeah, like last year, I think it was, yeah.
it was a part of our interim recommendations.
So you just update it somewhere maybe.
When did you say that? So you mentioned that it'd be great to have our support for the planning commission meeting. That was in November, I think. Is that the deadline?
Yes, it's the first Thursday in November. The date is escaping me at this point, but we're going to be presenting it, as Amy mentioned, to the board at their work session on the fourth Thursday of this month. So certainly if we could have something concrete to share with the board at that point, that would be appreciated as well. But if that's too too kind of soon of a deadline, would certainly be glad to accept anything that the committee was gracious enough to provide in terms of support for the 28th.
Is this just for the 8 accessory dwelling units? Or
Correct.
Oh, okay. And Derek, is that what you're talking about as far as the, okay.
So, yeah, I think if we can get a copy of that sent out to the coalition. If you guys try for that. We're talking about the accessory dwelling units, the ordinance, for this information on us, giving our endorsement.
And I think I sent out the information that Amy presented. It was part of the meeting invite too, so you'll have it so you can refer back to it if you need to. And I'll make sure to drop it into our OneDrive folder as well, so we'll have it there for reference.
But is that the recommend, is that, I heard you mention the summary or something, so is what you sent the full, I don't know how much the regulation is or the recommendation is, but
and what we
to me, it helps me, I don't want to read the whole, the nuts and bolts of what it is, if there's a way to get to the gist of what's being recommended.
Yeah, what we said before didn't have specifics in it. It was more our broad request for the accessory dwelling to be revised to allow for it to be more flexible.
Okay.
But what Amy presented at the end of it, there was essentially a summary of what changes they were making a recommendation.
No, I can't, I got to the end of it, so don't worry about it.
Yeah. So
And I think that is in the stuff.
okay.
And if it's not, you can send it to me, but I believe it's a PowerPoint that you sent.
Oh, yeah, there was a PowerPoint in your,
Hey,
there was, okay.
Yeah.
Amy
So
sent a one-page summary, I believe, as well, didn't she,
I
along
think
with
so. I
this?
have to go
Well,
back.
that's what I was looking about, that's what I was wondering about.
Yeah.
So,
So we'll go back and look, but I know there were 2 documents that were
Okay.
attached.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think what you had was the actual ordinance itself and then a memo sort of introducing the ordinance. I'm happy to share this presentation with y'all. That's absolutely, and I can, that way, the front is sort of informational items and the back basically goes over the big ticket stuff. And you can sort of see exactly what the changes are, sort of bulleted out. So I will send Marla my presentation so she can forward it out to y'all. So you have that as well. And I'll, am here to answer any questions. So if you have any questions, if you're thinking on this next week or something pops in your mind, you're obviously, feel free to, shoot me an email or shoot Mara an email or and get it to me somehow. And I'll be happy to answer any questions you have regarding this provision.
Yeah. And just for you all, you said just so you know what the rest of it, just at least just right now for folks here, how do you feel good about it? Just need more time to review something or those who haven't been able to see it yet?
no, I'm in favor of what you were talking about.
Just say that just with 9 of us total.
9.
So John said yes, so that's
That's
just,
fine.
just
We
that's
got a
fine.
majority. We do have a majority.
So then we'll just get that formalized, but just for your understanding kind of where we made it, that essentially the majority of folks essentially are.
Well, thank you, Derwin. We appreciate it.
Good. Well, thank you, Amy. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
All righty. All right. Are there any groups, community groups that's against ADUs?
Yeah.
Yes,
Oh, yeah.
absolutely.
Oh, yeah.
And there's more education. I don't, it's folks don't under, I don't know, would you agree, is that more education that?
I think there's definitely some education to it. I think some of it too is that it's probably more nuanced than saying they're opposed to it. I think they're opposed to opening up the process because some neighborhoods feel that it was a hard-won victory for them, as Derwin mentioned earlier, the compromise that council put together in 2017 requiring city council review of these things. And then what this proposal is doing is kind of opening it up in an effort to increase affordability and housing options by letting it be a staff review, which again, all our peer communities in North Carolina are already doing that. So we're kind of the one outlier in the 4 or 5 years since the last policy was developed. But we've already heard from various organizations that they're kind of opposed to undoing some of those regulations.
And is there some kind of outreach, education outreach to them or any way to?
We basically sent back the one-page summary that Amy was kind of talking about in terms of why we're doing this, and kind of we presented some information on how all our peer cities are kind of moving in this direction, but that's kind of the extent of the outreach or education at this point.
Okay. Well, and I'm sure just on this as we move forward, and, you know, if there's ways for us to keep these support of engagement communities on that, feel free to reach back out and let us know as we get this information back.
It's appreciated.
All right. Appreciate you all so much. Thank you with that. No, we started a bit late on, so a little bit, we're kind of scared, but just to see, Margaret, how you want to.
Well, I will make it up. Don't worry, but we got some cushion in here also. And a lot of this is, the cushion is so that in case you guys want to talk a little bit more, so we'll just be a little bit more disciplined with the open conversation component.
Okay. All right. So do we supposedly want to take a break before we jump in, or do we want to just keep rolling?
Well, I was late getting here, so don't run it by me. Goddamn. Those that were here on time may want to take a break. I don't know. It's up to y'all. I just got here rolling in your.
Yes, of course I don't.
Okay.
Yeah, so do we want to do some brief introductions? I mean, we did some informal stuff as folks came in earlier, but I think for the benefit of those who came in after we started the presentation, we might want to do some introductions. Oops.
All right, I'll start. I'm Kirk Erickson. I think most of you all know me at this point, but I'm the Assistant City County Planning Director.
I'm chair of the Affordable Housing Coalition.
I'm Joe Cronker. I'm retired and I guess a member of the coalition.
Ryan Alman, member of the coalition, and work in the affordable housing and community development space.
Paul McCoy, I'm with Partnership for Prosperity, which is very much concerned about these issues. So,
Underneath Morris with Housing NOLA.
For verifying the senior planning supervisor and community development department.
Hello, I'm Sharon Richmond. I'm the director of community development.
Yeah, Marlon. Community Development Director. Glad y'all are here. I'm real glad you're here. Of course, you know, this is near and dear to me, and yeah, I'm glad you're here.
I feel you.
Well, so I'm gonna rush through. I'm trying to change some of these, pull some of these slides out so we can see if we can get this done a little faster. Because a lot of you are familiar with this, and I know we were talking about pulling the whole group together today. Okay. That's great. I thought it was
Not your computer.
yeah, I was like, okay, that's interesting. So, you know, I'm gonna go through this really quickly, and what I want to do is, I want to spend some time reviewing the really great work that you guys did when we met a few weeks ago. And I'm sorry for I have a temporal imbalance caused by COVID, so it feels like, you know, yesterday feels like a week. So I don't have a good sense of time. I just have to know the dates and remember those dates. So what we want to do really quickly, and a lot of you have heard me talk about housing goals before, some of you haven't, and so we can get through that quickly. And I think it's going to be even more helpful to do like we did with the ADU, as we're talking about how we want to do the work here in Winston-Salem. You can ask what we did in New Orleans, but not focus so much on what we did. So that's what I was trying to sit here, pull some of these slides out, so that we could get started. I did want to, kind of ground for everybody. Okay, I know what's wrong with this thing. Yes, that's it. I did, so we're going to go back. We're going to start here. So, there we go. So as a reminder, one of the things that we talked about was the under overarching goals that Housing NOLA had to organize our work. And we looked at previous plans to make sure that we, you know, again, good work has been done already. You just got to build on it and get it aligned with an outcome-based model that also, you know, holds equity as the top, that's, you know, it's the measuring point. So you guys came up with some really great preliminary goals, and I wanted to go over those with everybody. Again, not everybody saw these, not everybody was in the room, but we wanted to talk about them again, and also just make sure that these are okay. And again, this is, you're just starting, right? And so there's nothing wrong with, you might look at these and go, I don't know what we were thinking, right? Because it might have been, you might have been feeling a type of way about something. And we want this to be very broad, very high level, understanding that a lot of things will go under them as you move into it. So number one, the preliminary goal is development of a comprehensive housing plan. So, you know, the affordable housing, this is more like the preliminary goals for this project under the Winston-Salem Affordable Housing Coalition. You guys still haven't even talked about, what are you going to call this and things like that. You want to do that as we're moving forward. But again, developing a comprehensive housing plan that centers communities' needs and engages them in a long-term process to provide housing opportunity for the people of Winston-Salem. One thing that we came out of that conversation was that this might not necessarily be a goal. This might be the mission statement for this project because it's clear, it's concise, it actually explains what you're trying to do. And so this might bump up to mission statement or vision or value statement. And then and look at that. Now we have 7 goals instead of 8 if you guys decide to do that. But then next you moved into, you want to make sure you're talking about preserving existing supply of housing, of affordable housing, and expand the total supply. Again, that's where policies like the ADU policy could come in. There are going to be other ones, but we made it clear we're talking rental and home ownership opportunities, and you guys made it clear you wanted to have that be a data-driven approach. That's important, right? That you're not just going, what does it feel like? What do I think? And that's a big part of the conversation you're going to have with community, as you all are. Community sits at the whatever table you guys convene for directing this process, because just as they were talking about the ADUs, a lot of those decisions, a lot of those objections are emotional. And a lot of the concerns, even when it's not emotional and it is fact-based, it is usually fact-based about them, right? it could be, you know, it's like, well, this is going to increase parking issues in my block. Just because it increases, because they're going to put, you know, your neighbors want to do 2 ADUs and it will increase parking on your block. That does not mean that ADUs in and of themselves cause a parking problem, right? And so you got to rely on data to drive a lot of these conversations. Prevent future displacement through development activities and continued study of policy review. Again, and I hate to do this for ADU policy, but we're gonna do that because it's easier, I think, to keep it grounded to the realities of Winston-Salem. Instead of talking in theory about other communities, what you guys have going on is a really, really good examples. And so the fact is that, and you're already doing some of this, right? That policy is being built with a firm foundation to either scale up or adjust as the data suggests. Develop routine and emergency housing navigation services for all the citizens of Winston-Salem. This is something that was lifted up in that call that, like a lot of communities, nobody really knows how to find housing. Either if they're moving here for the first time, hopefully, if, you know, again, if they're living with, if their company can engage a real estate service for them, they'll do that. But if it's just maybe somebody making $70,000, $80,000 a year, nobody's going to do that for them. We could figure it out, right? But where do they go? How do they do that? And then, of course, people who don't make that much money, how do they find housing? And of course, what happens if the worst should happen? If your house is, damaged in, snowstorm or fire, where do you find housing? And you guys lifted up that you wanted to make sure that there's a system in place that people don't have to figure it out. Like you don't have to depend on and it could be that that there's an emergency system that's run by nonprofits. That we're not saying that won't happen, but what you guys lifted up is that you wanted something that everybody knew about, not that it was a secret. Improve quality of life and preserve neighborhood character while enforcing and promoting fair housing policies. Another one where the ADU policy kind of makes a really good example, and as you want to introduce more, because you're going to hear from people who are, some of them will be NIMBYs, but there's also going to be people who have, it's really easy to dismiss neighborhood leaders, particularly if they are in neighborhood associations that are inherently inequitable, meaning they don't actually represent, again, the professional meeting goers, right? It's really easy to get into a groove where you dismiss those people, right? But they're not always wrong. They're not even wrong most of the time. It's situational. And so what are you disturbing the quality of life? Are you disturbing the neighborhood characteristics, right? Or are you looking at policies that people said do those things, but are in fact violations of Fair Housing Act, keeping working class, vulnerable populations out of the neighborhood and redlining or segregating? And that's hard work to do, but it is absolutely possible, right? I wouldn't have let you guys put anything on here if it wasn't possible.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Go ahead. Well, no, if mine is the word choice on number 5, but yeah, when you say improve quality of life and preserving neighborhood character while enforcing, should that not be by enforcing, or or does that make a difference?
Well, because the reason it's two different things is that it doesn't necessarily have to be fair housing. You can improve quality of life and neighborhood characteristics, and it doesn't have any fair housing implications. It's not just
by doing
fair housing. You can do other things, like again the ADU policy. Unless you do it wrong,
right?
It would have fair housing implications. That's why it's wild, because it's.
I think I had an issue with I think I had not an issue, a question about that one from the very beginning.
Yeah. No.
I did. So just from the improved quality of life standpoint, that's
correct. Because there's other things you can do to improve quality of life that should have nothing to do with fair housing. Hopefully, like that. Right. Transit, trash pickup. Those are things that you want to look at and make sure that neighborhoods are strong. Right. Now, they could have fair housing implications because, okay, well, who lives in the neighborhood with the best transit access, and are those neighborhoods accessible to, one, the people who need to be on the bus, which are going to overwhelmingly be low-income people, and this is the South, they're going to be low-income people of color. Are those neighborhoods, and have you somehow, hoarded all of the opportunities, the jobs, the grocery stores, into one neighborhood? That becomes a fair housing issue. But looking at a neighborhood, particularly a majority neighborhood of color, and introducing better transit, grocery stores, if it's a food desert, that's not a fair housing violation. You're fixing the problem.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. Wow.
So
okay.
Right. That's right. That's why it's wild.
Okay.
My question
Go ahead.
is, should we add promoting fair and equitable housing policies? And the reason I'm saying that is because, fair could be inequitable, maybe redundant, but sometimes there's a lot of policies that are in place now that if you look at them through a racial equity lens, they're not. We may want to change it.
Yeah, no, you're right.
Yeah.
Right. There is a distinction, because we talk about equal access versus equitable access, right? So there is a distinction.
Yeah, no, that's a good catch there. So, and then number 6, encourage innovative and sustainable design in housing transportation and infrastructure. Again, that's another one that you guys, you want to talk about energy efficiency, you wanted to talk about addressing climate change, you also wanted to make sure that people's homes are of high quality, and that they can stand up to what the people need, right? That people aren't putting money in cheap housing. You start talking about manufactured housing. Again, that's innovative. That's also fast, and it's working better. 15 years ago, we were talking about modular housing, manufactured housing, and it was kind of a neat idea. 15 years later, it's actually a viable alternative. It's just, you got to make sure that it meets the architectural standards, the neighborhood characteristics, right? It's like, oh, well, because that would be the thing that that community members push back on. I know you guys have a habitat number. They typically run into that kind of pushback in communities, particularly historic communities. Their homes are good quality, but because they're also trying to be cost efficient, they sometimes struggle to go into neighborhoods and meet neighborhood characteristics that don't improve the quality of the house, but add to the costs, right? And so Habitat finds itself struggling to be in those kinds of neighborhoods. And again, sometimes the neighborhoods where they really do need to be, but it will just add additional costs. So are there other ways to do that, like manufactured housing, that might be able to help split the difference? Because you can do a lot when you're prefabbing a house. You can add some of those flourishes, and if they're doing it to scale, then they can bring down costs. But again, you guys wanted to talk about that. Increasing accessibility for all, including residents with special needs. One of the things that we want to help you guys do through this process is name who your special needs residents are. You guys talked about the homeless, people with disabilities, voucher holders, and refugees, right? And then others. And so you may want to expand that list. You may want to reduce that list. All of these people here are folks that you all named as folks that y'all know who are having trouble in Winston-Salem to find housing, on top of just what's happening in the market because of the expansions and the pressures that are already coming. These folks are having a particularly difficult time. And again, this is not intended to be the final list. These are the ones that y'all named. And so what we want to see you guys do is, again, expand that list, confirm this list, and roll with it. And then,
could we change the number 7? This is pretty small, but could we change people with disabilities to people who are differently able?
Okay, not a problem. Okay. Is it able? With a D?
With a D.
Yeah.
Chair.
We don't just pick up another chair. Come on around.
And then last is examine existing policies with a racial equity lens and the impact those policies have on goals 1 through 7. Again, that was one that I wanted to make sure it was included.
There's one thing I wanna ask the committee about. As I was looking at this and thinking about some conversations I've been having recently, and that's around what we communicate and how we talk about this, and wondering if there needs to be a goal. So I'm struggling with my words right now. But at some point, I think we have to, and maybe it's under the auspices of addressing the issue of NIMBY, but we've talked before about the need for a communication strategy. How do we dispel myths about what this is that we're trying to do? And of course, one of the things I'm endeavoring to do is move away from, as much as possible, for instance, saying affordable housing, as opposed to talking about housing affordability, because they're different, right? And I know that part of the pushback we get, part of the whole thing around NIMBYism is this fear and concern about affordable housing. We often talk about that 2x4 costs the same. It goes into the affordable unit as it does the market rate unit. So how do we talk about this in a way that builds public support and dispels a lot of the myths? So I don't know how, and if it comes in here as a goal, how you articulate that, but I do believe that undergirding all of this is, how do we talk about it and how do we build public support?
So to that point, Marla, will there be an accompanying document that contains a strategy around how to accomplish our goals? Because to me, the communication piece around NIMBYism or anything else we want to emphasize comes in the strategic development of how we're going to implement the plan or the goals. So I wonder, unless you are thinking that it needs the kind of visibility and exposure that it actually needs to be a part of the goals, because the goals will be the first thing or the most displayed to the public probably. So it depends on.
So is it a goal or a tactic?
Right, yeah, a tactic, yeah.
Well,
So
could a goal be building public support for housing affordability?
Well, yeah.
But that's why I was saying I was struggling with how to even start to bring those words together, but I just knew that was something that has to somehow be a part of all of this work.
Right. So I think that there's one, as a goal, I think that's an interesting part of the goal, but to your point about the language, I think it's important for us to enter this conversation with that in mind in terms of how we're talking about what we're talking about. So how we include anything we're doing. So if we're saying housing affordability or we're talking about access to housing, then as we're talking through each one of these categories, we should be talking through that.
In the language that we intend.
And it could go into a mission statement or a vision or value statement. That's one way of looking it up, but it also is worth discussing if it's a part of if it's one of the strategic goals, if it's a goal, because you can bifurcate the goals into, the constraints and the what, and then add a couple that are talking about the how you do it, right? What is preserving existing supply, preventing future displacement, develop routine and emergency or housing navigation services, and do so. You're talking about, again, number 8 starts already there. You've already put in a how goal here, making sure that you continually, using a racial equity lens. And what you might want to add is ensuring that communication, that language, that that you're talking about it correctly, in order to preserve a new system that you want to put in place. So there's a couple different ways to do this. It's just, and I think it's worth noting, it's worth adding it if you guys feel that strongly about it. And again,
well, that was why I was asking the question. I didn't know how the goal would be structured, I guess, so from a syntax standpoint.
Gotcha. So it's a couple different ways you can do it. Like, we can add it to the vision and value. And again, we haven't even taken this out. We've got a question mark and vision statement. What we can do is add a 9 and then put it 9, add 9 communications and outreach. And this could be a vision. This could be a vision or value statement. And then as you guys start organizing, because right now you're still talking about the broad, and we want to make sure you do this first, because the next thing we're going to take you all through is, what does an equitable planning process look like, and making sure we talk about community engagement, and then after lunch, you guys are going to talk about what the structure should look like. So you need to know what you're endeavoring to do before you come up with a structure, right? You can't, and so this feels a little, and it's gonna be iterative, and nobody should be concerned about that. That's fine that it's iterative, that you're gonna go back and revisit discussions and decisions that you made. That's okay. Don't think of yourselves as overthinking it or second guessing yourselves. This process has to evolve.
And I know we talked about defining affordable housing, and I think that's important. I was just on a call, and we started talking about affordable housing. A developer said he was building affordable housing, and they asked him, how much do they cost? He said $350,000. And they were like, why are you calling that affordable housing?
Yeah, affordable for who?
That's it.
It's all contextual.
And he said it is affordable housing.
Because and why?
I don't know why.
Well,
it's affordable for who can afford.
Well, I mean, but just because they cost $350,000 doesn't mean that's what they're gonna cost to the people who live in them.
Who actually occupies it.
Right. I mean, particularly if it's a rental project and they're doing low-income housing tax credits. I mean, this is a deeper conversation, but low-income housing tax credits is the single biggest way this country creates new subsidized rental housing. And that process in of itself does it in some of the most expensive, the most expensive projects you'll see in communities, with per unit costs, well out of range of what the average citizen in that community could afford, much less the citizens that are being targeted. But because it's a very expensive process.
But it sounds like Paula's example is a single family dwelling.
That's
Being a community or a neighborhood is being developed, and it's going to be $350,000 or higher homes. But she, the developer, says that that's affordable because houses probably in this neighborhood ought to be costing $500,000,
right,
or 400. I mean, or 600,000 or something.
It was single family development.
Yeah.
Well, and to the point, and that's why I said in terms of that in that language of accessible housing, in terms of who make sure there's access for everyone, because I had a similar conversation just the other day with the realtor was on that. Right now, we're seeing in that space 350 is about the average that he's seeing folks engaging here in the community. I was surprised at that. But when you look at a mortgage though on that, you're talking about what, $1,800, $1,900 a month, and then how do you compare that to the current upward trend in rental, which is similar in terms of those numbers. And so I think we got to define that piece of creating access for all to find affordability based on where you fall in the income bracket. But then how does that overlap with existing supply? So we're talking about creating access for all in our community. Where is the deficit that we have in our community for folks to access? Where are those areas where folks have the biggest deficit? And I think that's been where we turn our biggest focus to try to repair. At least that's just my thought. Because everyone, whether you make $1 million or you make $10,000, it's the question of what's accessible and what's affordable to you. And depending upon where you are, it's $1 million, you make $1 million a year, you can still be in places that are not affordable. So I think that's part of the trouble of defining to the language. Most of the time, we automatically go directly to low income housing rather than affordability for everyone.
But the goals won't have the definition. I mean, that wouldn't be where you put.
No, the goals that's next.
Yeah, that would have to be some other. I don't know how what our project will look like. What the draft plan will look like, but you wouldn't normally have that in the goals. But it needs to be addressed. I know what you're saying. It's just like Durham was talking about advocacy. I mean, there was nothing about advocacy in there either, as a matter of fact, in the goals. And so it may be unless it's in number 9 that she was doing the communications piece.
Yeah, put right over the hover over the button, the 3 dots. 10. Yeah. That's what you want everybody to see.
Okay.
By the way, is this being streamed? Could I have done this at home?
No,
Okay. I was
But
wondering
not
about
now.
that.
No, so.
I was wondering about that.
Two quick things, just because we knew that the majority of you couldn't come, we wanted to figure out how to record it so everybody could still see it.
Later.
And as we talked back and forth, starting at around just about 3 o'clock yesterday afternoon, then I asked the question, well, what if we tried to Zoom it and record it and then drop it into the city's YouTube channel? And we went back and forth, and this was what we came up with. So then for everybody who said they couldn't come, then about 10 minutes to 10 this morning, I sent the Zoom link just in case they could log in at some point through the day. But we were hustling, trying to get this together. And with that kind of aside, I'll briefly introduce Andronika. This is Patrice Tony. She's the Assistant City Manager, and she covers the Community Development Department. Andronika Morris from New Orleans.
Hi, nice to meet you.
So in other words, that's my boss.
Okay.
All right, I'll go back.
So we kind of jumped ahead, we introduced this, so we need to talk about defining affordable housing is the next piece inside of the agenda. We do want to have this conversation, right? So you talk about what does the definition actually mean, right? Typically you, and one of the things you want to think about is it needs to be something that you can monitor, right? It needs to be something that you can track. Because you, this is an outcome-based plan. That's what we support people doing. Is outcome-based plan, so that you need to be able to prove that you've been successful and refine it if something's falling short. So it needs to be a definition that's trackable. We use typically, everybody uses this. There's a bunch of different ways you can get it done. The 30% rule. So the 30% rule is you spend no more than 30% of your gross income on your total housing costs. For homeowners, that's mortgage and utilities. And for renters, it's rent plus utilities. It's not a great number.
Did that used to be 33%?
No,
it's not much. But
it used to be 25. It went up. And yeah, part of it was, it's a rule of thumb that's kind of evolved and now it's used without any real economic analysis. If you do the math, if you're making, $100,000 a year, and it's a household, right? Spending more than 30% of that, of your gross income, again, nobody takes home what their gross income is. So, so you're setting folks up to kind of struggle a little bit. It is a terrible number when you look at low income folks, right? So a senior citizen getting by on $900 a month in Social Security. Yeah, $300 a month in rent, that's great for us. That's leaving that senior citizen with $600 to do everything else that they need to do. They haven't eaten. And again, for minimum wage workers, these are not great numbers, but that is the number that all of our subsidized housing programs use. And it's tracked by the census. The census will tell you how many people in your community are cost burdened, is what that 30% number does. And so it is something that you can track. You can change it.
Well, yeah, I just thought in old underwriting guidelines when I was in banking that 33% was from a mortgage underwriting standpoint, it used to be 33% from the total housing cost.
Well, again, the bankers got this from this, but it's really not a good number because, like, you think about it, they're like, oh, that leaves front end ratios and things like that. Yeah, they use all of that stuff. But it's like, but then that's why a lot of the banks have a back end ratio because they're like, yeah, we need to be looking at your overall debt to make sure that you can in fact meet these obligations. Banks. The front and back end is actually a much more elegant, it's sometimes problematic, but it at least addresses the realities of the situation, right? Whereas the front end ratio, using the 30% rule, doesn't talk about it. It says, well, we want to leave you something. And we need to pick it. I mean, again, it is unfortunate that it has become policy without the underlying research and analysis. It literally, when I got my master's, that was my project was in, well, what's a better number? And when doing the research, because I, like a lot of people, just presumed that someone had done the analysis. Literally, no one did the analysis. Like, it was just, it evolved over the years. It was just seen as a rule of thumb that you shouldn't spend more than one paycheck on your total housing costs, right? That's 25%, and that became 25%. And one weekly paycheck, I should say. So that became 25%, which actually isn't 25%, right? Because you have 52 weeks in a year, and so one paycheck isn't actually 25%, but it got rounded up to 25%. And then it got adopted when the Fair Housing Act was adopted. It got incorporated as the baseline, that 25% got adopted as the baseline for what public housing residents should pay. And then when Congress and Ronald Reagan decided to cut HUD's budget, they increased the 25% to 30% to reduce HUD's budget. That was it. That's how we got it. None of that has anything. That's how we got to 30%. That's it.
And just so you'll know, in the definitions that we have, that it's in our OneDrive and we've shared with you all, we have in here affordability. So we don't define it. We don't define affordable housing in the set of definitions of the glossary that we gave you. Is we have affordability in parentheses is housing, and it says a measure of how much one's income one spends on housing, be it rental or mortgage payments. Housing is considered unaffordable if it costs more than 30% of the resident's income. And I will say that part of this is stuff that I repurposed from my days in Louisiana. So there's terms I took out because they don't apply here, but a lot of this is from work that Angelica and I and the groups that we worked with put together in years past. But we have just simply affordability in the glossary that we've created thus far.
Well, because there are so many people who are paying more than 30%, and some is 50%, even I've heard as high as 70%.
That's right.
Mm-hmm. Do these people who are paying more, are they entitled to something? Do they get something else? I mean, some other benefits?
You like some subsidy or something?
Subsidy, yeah. I mean, what is available for people who are in that category?
Well,
is there? I mean,
well, on the one hand, you would think that potentially, again, depending on where they live and their circumstances, you would think that they might be somebody who would be eligible for a voucher, and they could be. Mm-hmm. But then we have a waiting list for vouchers. We don't have enough places that will take vouchers. So people in the meantime are overly stressed. They are severely cost burdened, which means you pay more than 50% of your income towards housing, right? So we do have a high number of people who are severely cost burdened, and it's because there aren't enough resources available. But like I said, even when you
qualify them for food stamps or for
no, not necessarily. And you know, that's a whole different process for determining eligibility based on the poverty line. You know, and so DSS, they have their own calculations. That call we were on yesterday, right? They're talking about 187.5% of the poverty line is what you the eligibility criteria to get support from legal aid, for instance. So what happens around food stamps and Medicaid and other social supports is driven by the poverty line and where that stacks up. And then you've got this whole separate thing that we do in the housing field. But that kind of gets us into a bigger issue around, you know, livable wages, poverty, and other things. Yeah.
To the point you're raising, I think going back to our goals, one of the things that we had was to develop navigation and emergency access services. And so there's not now, but maybe those are the folks that should be prioritized when we get to that point.
That's a good point. Yeah.
So, okay, so Marla read their definition. Do you wanna, you can put it up, can't you?
You know, I was just.
Oh, no, because you're not connected. You can email it to me.
Okay.
Yeah, so we want to make sure that you guys are, we do want to talk about defining, the ability to define. And tracking it becomes, that can be a function of the how, right? Some stats, if you guys pick something other than 30%, it's going to be, and it's not as easy as possible to track the 30% rule as well, right? You have analysis being done. You have to do the analysis. You have to get the census data, and they usually allow you to scrub it so that you can get to the 30%. Sometimes they'll do it for you in some communities. We'd already checked you guys, and they don't put it out for y'all, but like, the data is there, and so you can get to it. But it depends on what you all want to do, and you don't have to use a fixed percentage, right? You could be combining other factors.
You know, well, just as a resource, this is a question. In doing some research a while back, I saw that we have a state data center. Have any of you ever tried to retrieve information from the state data center? Because I'm curious how much data they have that we could actually find out about maybe some of the stuff that we're talking about here in Winston. I was looking for something in particular now. I don't remember what it was when I stumbled upon the fact that we had one.
State data center for what, all that, I mean, for what? For
It looked as though it was any information from a demographic and economic standpoint for the communities in North Carolina was what I seem to recall. But you know, where you can find your census data and some other configurations or something. It's like I said, it's been a minute, but all of a sudden, just thinking about the data as I'm hearing us talk, I remember kind of coming across and actually bookmarked it.
To the state auditor's office.
I read
That's
it.
a resource that I certainly. They kind of analyzed some of the 2020 census data and done some infographics and things of that nature. I can't recall seeing anything related to the housing space on that topic, but that's not the same resource we're talking about. That's certainly somewhere that data is available.
What's it called again?
Yeah, state law.
Because I have a site here, because I attended a bookmark. It's called State Data Center, and then it has NC OSBM, Office of State Budget. Okay, so, but that they consider that the heading on that says State Data Center, so that might be something different.
There's all kinds of state data.
Okay.
It just depends.
Okay. But even what you're talking about doesn't really speak to the housing stuff, right?
Yeah. Another resource that may or may not speak to the housing source is Carolina Demography from UNC Chapel Hill. They have a website and we've done some demographic analysis of various county level trends. So I bet that one got some good data there as well.
So inquire more of what policies are existing in other areas, or what question I guess is we're looking at, just kind of see what kind of data they have.
Yeah, just, you know, as we were talking about who's done what analysis, and if we were to look at potentially some other kind of metric, you know, instead of the standard 30%, where would we start to research the information? You know, because I would have a clue, right? And so that's what I remember. Oh, I saw something about a state data
I
center.
say that I know that the state itself does not have, when it comes to housing, there is very, very limited data and information around housing. The newest thing is just, I don't know if they've done the report yet, but there was a legislation page that came through a study bill that made requests of cities and towns across the state. So that they start information
the two makes me think about two things. One, you know, we talked about whatever the work that we do, data driven, number one. And then number two, I reflect back on what Housing NOLA did. And one of their main groups, work groups, was around data. And I think that, you know, as we look to actualize the work, we're going to probably need some kind of specialty emphasis on data. That has to be just incorporated as part of what we do.
The North Carolina Housing Coalition has a county level profile of foresight. And like that nice.
Oh, from the National Low Income Housing Coalition is where that came from.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm familiar with that. Yeah, and because they do the out of reach report every year, they do the gap, called the GAP, the National Income Housing Coalition. Angelique and I are both members of that national group.
And the good thing about them is it's a good place to get that kind of data. The problem is they don't do homeowners. They're only focused on rentals.
Right.
This
And
has some homeownership data on this graphic.
yeah, just the baseline kind of information. That's kind of like the site that the National Housing Conference does called Paycheck to Paycheck. It gives you a kind of a really good breakdown of, say for instance, it looks at both home ownership and rental, but it just gives you like the fair market rent for a 2-bedroom or 3-bedroom apartment, and it does it by your community, and it lists a number of occupations, and then you can check those occupations, and then it'll do a graph for you, and it'll show what the fair market rent is, what the income needs to be in order to afford it, and then for those occupations it shows how much they make and whether they can afford the fair market rent, and it has like 80 or 100 occupations, and then it also shows the average cost of a like 3-bedroom home in this area, and it graphs it the same kind of way. But really kind of getting in and unpacking all the data, you know, we don't have some of that, and I'm wondering if we, as time goes by, if we're going to need somebody who could really get in and do the data. Because, you know, of course, I'm thinking about Allison Flyer and her group with the data center in New Orleans,
but again, and they, you know, it's finding someone like, again, that's part of the process, right? Are there other resources that you can use? And will they work in your definition, right? And so.
So, I mean, I guess where I was going to go is, as inelegant as the definition obviously is, it's so widely used that it would almost make sense to use it. And then if we need to communicate, you know, additional data, you know, additional talking points or data points around that, but having that as a starting point, knowing that there are going to be things that we could leverage out there seems to be a good place for us to go.
Yeah, that's where we ended up too. We're still not happy about that, but you know, it's hard. And
you have to start somewhere.
And because all of the programs that you were talking about are built around those things,
right?
And you're at least aligned with what, you know, potentially the resources we're going to try to create.
That's right. That's right. And you can, I mean, and again, you might want to say, okay, we want to make sure that any live tech units are, you know, can we talk to those developers about pushing deeper, having additional resources for those folks to get them to 25% or 20% or something like that. But yeah, especially when you're talking about seniors, and that could be where you do it as well. Your vulnerable populations may say, okay, let's craft something for whom the 30% rule just really doesn't work. And that's those sets of policies come out there. And again, you want to be able to, we don't like counting widgets, but again, you do need to demonstrate success. If it's been successful, and again, counting helps you figure out where you're falling short. It's just that I can't overstress how critical it is to get into a data mindset to deal, particularly to deal with, you know, the emotional reactions that are going to come from that.
When you talk about driving resources, that's going to be the outcomes that will attract those resources.
That's right.
So locally, we have data people like CSAM, Forsyth Beaches, Center for Housing and Community Development. We have the Spatial Justice Center. We have the Piedmont Triad Regional Council, who all mines data. Is No, those are not groups that we could use.
But I'm just saying, we're gonna have to make sure that we have somebody or bodies who do that work on behalf of this effort, right? Yeah, somebody whose job it is to mine the data and bring it to this work. Yeah, we've got to have somebody who focuses on it.
And those folks have formed sort of a collaborative. And we work with them. All of them as a collaborative. So, they work together.
Yeah, but I think as part of what comes out of this, you know, somebody within this initiative, this effort has to own interfacing with all of those groups and culling the data that we need that informs what we do.
So from a budget perspective, does the coalition have budget capacity to contract with one or a number of those entities follow this?
Not yet. That's another part of what we have to talk about is how we want to fund the work.
Because I think you're right about having someone that owns that responsibility to keep up with and cull and manage the data, because you gotta have reliable data. That's a big, but I mean, if you're talking about, for instance, I don't know, but I know the site futures, you gotta have, it's a contract necessary. They have to support their organization with the contractual relationships they do to collect, mine, and manage data for various organizations, as well as their own inside county kind of thing. So I just didn't know what kind of fiscal capacity we had.
Well, we have a little, but I don't believe that. And when we say we, so really you're just looking at what resources the city has. And I think that, and this is something that I can speak more to about the New Orleans experience. One of the things that I'm very sensitive about when we say it like this, is that this work has to be owned by the community. This isn't the city. It can't just be seen as the city. And so we have to figure out, you know, especially as we start doing more of the community engagement and stuff, but we also have to figure out who are key stakeholders or partners who need to be at this table and who actually maybe own some aspects of this, and how to create or cultivate the resources to fund the work. Because this can't be housed within City Hall, the city staff. This is bigger than that.
Well, you know, I agree, but I thought at one time we had talked about also not if this was going to be housed in the city or whatever, but we also talked about what kind of fiscal capacity is going to take you for this organization, for the coalition, in order to, you know, once the plan is developed, somebody has to keep up with it, carry it out. I mean, so are you saying that whole thing, that whole process needs to be outside of the city's management? Is that what I'm hearing?
I think that would be best. There are a lot of challenges when we try to house certain things within.
Sure. Yeah. You're right. Yeah.
And because this needs to be a community-owned process, I think it needs to sit outside of the city. You know, I think the city right now is serving as a catalyst to kind of get this going and contribute some resources. But at the end of the day, yeah, ultimately it's got to be owned outside the city, because like we experienced in New Orleans, you know, they even have a report card system for who owns the different pieces in order to hold you up your part. And I think most recently you told me the city got an E- or an F, right? So the city even gets graded on their ability to discharge those things that they're charged.
But so even in New Orleans and NOAA, is there not some managing entity that manages that scorecard or that report card kind of thing?
That's what I do every day.
Okay.
Well, not anymore, but my team does, yeah.
But your team, but you're not a part of the city's.
No, we partners with them. So yeah, but you can do, there are different versions of it, right? Like you can do a hybrid version that is a formal public-private partnership. Because I think what you're getting at too is you do want to get the city's continual buy-in
Yeah,
right? And
yeah, I mean, you gotta have some perpetuity to this. I mean,
right,
you know, and what you risk by getting it outside of that
yeah,
is private funding, because if you're not looking at public funding, city, county, whatever, you're looking at private funding. And if private funding goes away for whatever reason, does this ever go away? And all
the
this work
public,
is for nil, that's gonna be the end result.
and the public funding could go away too, could change and things like that. How do you make sure that that commitment remains solid? What Marla's talking about is accountability, and that's hard to do. You know, city agencies do not want to stand up and say, I failed,
Right.
right? Even when you look at the numbers, you go, oh, half the people who live here can't afford to live here. And we didn't get our dollars out. And, you know, a lot of times, and particularly when they have elected officials, there's a lot of tension with that. Y'all are dealing with that right now with y'all partners in the county around your rental assistance program. Winston-Salem rental assistance program is going really well. The counties is not so much. And there's not they're not gonna stand up and say, we're doing a bad job. Somebody outside of that has to say that.
So are you looking for an entity that's existing or something that's formerly you all created or
we were created? Well, a combination with the entity that started, that did the work initially, that incubated the work, was an existing nonprofit. It was actually, we're not getting into all of that, but it was an existing nonprofit that was engaged and authorized to do all of this. And then we decided to, we'll do the process, right? It was one of the conversations came up and said, you know, the city can't be responsible for grading themselves, right? Like, they're like, you can't set them up to fail like that because, right, they're just gonna, it's just too much to ask of them, that they would come back and say, oh, we didn't do this. And again, you can still be in partnership with them while saying, look, this isn't working. And you also want to talk about why.
Right.
I'm
sorry, go ahead. No, I was gonna say, but if I remember correctly, Andrew, your effort started back in several years, but was major foundation funding to begin with.
Correct. Oh,
so, and it's a little bit, that's normally how most initiatives in a community get started that's gonna have any kind of impact and longevity, is that you get private funding to say, this is an issue in our community, we need to do something about it, so we'll provide the funding to get this started. But the perpetual funding needs to come from a perpetual source.
Right, and so yeah, you start talking about what's the sustainability model.
Right.
And yeah, and again, that's a part of the long-term conversation is, and because what you start looking at it, and you slowly start to get to it, like the data needs, you guys might raise the funding up front to do all of the data analysis, and then through the process, there's a group of people who have funding already. It could be the city, could be county, could be state,
right.
And then that is how your data needs are going to be met over the long term. And so then what are you looking to fund over the long term? Again, the city, the state, county, the housing programs, your housing authorities, they all have reporting processes, right? So then what are you doing is someone's pulling all of that together for the Affordable Housing Coalition, distilling that information, helping you guys do your rubrics and your assessments and things like that. So it doesn't have to be, because what you don't want, and you want to be careful about that, is you don't want to try and make something that is duplicative, right?
Right. You definitely don't.
You want it to be integrated, right? And you want it to, even though the city can be like something happens 10 years down the line, 5 years down the line. I do believe Marla told me your mayor does he have term limits?
He's been the mayor for years.
No.
Well, there's an election every 4 years. There's an election.
There's an election. You just never know what happens, right? You just never know what happens.
And Kurt has been raising his hand too. He wanted to jump in for a minute.
Thank you, Marla. I just wanted to throw out another potential source for kind of some of the crunch the data from this. I know Marla all around some good points to confer with some of those organizations. But I think Joe brought up some really good points about kind of a stable source who can crunch that data. Someone that's outside of the city, but is still kind of accountable to the citizens who live in the area. And Map for Site, which is technically overseen by county government and those who oversees them, he's really been looking for partnerships with community agencies and advocacy groups that they can kind of provide some data crunching efforts for. They would probably be able to do that if not free, for a nominal or a much lower fee. They're a stable organization that's, again, partnered with other groups in the community. And I think it would be worth having a conversation with Joe and his staff and just see what Map for Site could provide in that arena.
But we pay them, so they are still a city county entity.
Well, yeah, I know they're a city county entity, but I mean, technically, they're kind of housed under the county.
They sit in the county.
Yeah, they are.
Yeah.
Well, and the people that crunch the numbers don't have to be the ones that create the grades either. So you
Correct.
clean data and have somebody else actually create the
That's right.
the track.
Are we clear what type of data we're looking?
Not
Well,
yet.
Not yet. So, okay, I wanted to put a pin in
We're talking about the food,
conversation.
But
I
that's
just
what
want
I'm
to jump in just real quick, because I think there are two different pieces to think about when we're talking about this. I think we're talking about the data, talking about how organizational, how we sit in different places. But for us as a coalition, I think there's two pieces for us to understand. As a part of the work that I think we have to understand that will be effectuated outside for long term, but then also understanding the actual requested or our responsibility as an affordable housing coalition, which long term, one of the specific things that is asked to be done from the coalition is that advisement to the council on its actions. That is a specific thing that is in writing of our resolution of organization that we are commissioned to advise the council on how they spend housing resources. That is a specific responsibility that's there, and how we look at the policy. The same reason that we reviewed for the accessory dwelling those are responsibilities of the coalition. So when we look at that, I think we got to look at what is that work that's effectuated outside of that, and then what's that long-term work that is done by that coalition, or do we see that as, well, this coalition essentially doing that, along with this outside piece? Because I don't want us to forget that's a big part that we've not done as much of in the work, but also have a conversation. I just have a conversation with a member a couple of weeks ago, and they were very clear that they felt having an outside voice like we did on the accessory dwelling unit helps lessen the political tension in their conversations, because folks get territorial. You want to spend money over here in this board, I want it on this board. Or if a non-political body is saying, hey, we think this is good, people can take their positions, but it lessens the political nature of the conversation, because it's coming from outside who's making a recommendation and supporting. So just thinking about how that, when we talk about effectuated work outside where things live, and then I'm just thinking of how that continues to vary with the council mandated responsibilities of the coalition. So.
Did you all use any university support in your work? Okay.
Oh, yeah.
They do great,
Yes, they do.
Data.
They do. Especially again in that, because there's going to be a lot of initial data analysis that won't need to be replicated over time, right? Again, just this, especially as you're tracking, impact of any short-term events like COVID, for example, right? We will get out of this one day. And so what's the impact of the rental assistance programs, the eventual home ownership assistance programs that are going to be deployed? There's definitely a need for different partners to do that kind of one-time analysis. But yeah, you do have to find somebody to talk about your long-term needs. But part of the reason I wanted to put a pin in this is that you guys, we do have a data conversation at the end, not at the end, later today. In the afternoon, and part of the reason is I want to make sure that we don't miss anything by having a conversation now, because One thing that you guys do need to talk about first is, you talked about the definition. I think everybody's saying that we want to stick with the 30%, but we also want to get into talking about community engagement strategy. And then and that's what we want to do before we break for lunch, which should be now actually, is, and Derwin, you started taking us there about the structure of what you guys need for this process, right? And I'm gonna do this really quick with you all, to put a bug in your mind, and we're gonna come where if the lunch is here, we'll eat. And you guys you can think about it, and then we can get into it after lunch. If that works.
Or we can work through lunch if you would rather.
Yeah, because I got an earlier.
Okay.
Okay, what, just around what time do you guys need to leave? Because then that kind of helps us figure out what all we need to push and crunch and.
I was gonna leave between 1 and 2. I gotta be gone strictly by 2 o'clock. I mean, I didn't know what.
Okay, then
Before
we'll
that.
push.
Okay, can you make it to 2, Paula?
Yes.
Okay,
Okay,
then
all right,
we'll
so
push.
okay.
So just familiarize you guys with our structure. So we have an executive committee that now functions as the board of directors, but there was always an executive committee of folks who kept the train going. We're responsible for fundraising, managing the RFPs. Go ahead.
So, as you're thinking, as you're saying that, I'm starting to think, and I should probably know this, but maybe one of y'all will figure it. Is this supposed to be an indefinite committee, or is it supposed to? So we talked about making recommendations, and that's where I'm going. Like, is it make recommendations and then step out? Because I'm thinking like executive committee, is that this group ultimately, or could this group be that, or does this group need to wind down and we would need to stand something else up?
Of
You know, if there's like a zero.
So at the end of the day, that would be up to council, because the coalition exists at the pleasure of council.
But there's not already defined sunset, I guess.
No, and at least in my experience, for most commissions or commissions that are put in place, they exist in perpetuity, essentially, until whatever they were working on is resolved. You take the 10-year planning, the commission in homelessness, it still exists. The name of it shifted a bit. You take, the citizens, police review boards, all those commissions. You take, all those things, they exist for whatever purpose that they work through, and essentially at the pleasure of council. One of the, I guess, more recent, just individual one, there was a Silk Plant Forest Commission that dealt with the criminal thing that they followed through. Their task was very specific.
Sir.
Review this, report back, and give us your thoughts. And after that, it was gone.
So your executive committee and board, I guess, are probably a subset of them. Do you recruit and bring those members on, or are they appointed by a third party? How is that?
So when we started, because we were a public-private partnership, right? It's not one of our local foundations set up this equity challenge around housing, and the plan was the desired goal. We reached out to the city and said, this is what we want to do, we need your buy-in. So they appointed someone to the executive committee. There was a representative from the foundation, and then we recruited several other folks to participate, keeping that group kind of small and tight, because it's a decision-making body from a structural standpoint, right? They didn't sign off on the preliminary goals. The other, we're gonna go through who else was there. These were folks who were literally responsible for making sure that the trains and planes ran on time, right? Where there's the group sets, the leadership board sets out an ambitious schedule. This is the group that makes sure, do you have enough money to have all of these meetings, right? Do you have the locations? This is the group that's going to review. If you want to get a partnership with like Maps by Foresight, and you want to sign something with them to pay them, you need someone to make those kinds of decisions. And again, they don't override the other process from setting goals and things like that, but they are responsible for making sure that it happens. And so we had Marla's counterpart was on that executive committee, the initial funder, and who else? And then we had our redevelopment authority executive director served on it, and I was on it at that point because I had another job, and a couple other people who volunteered, and we met once a week. That group met once a week. During the planning process, we kept the meetings to a half an hour, Friday mornings, and we were boom, 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 this is what's happening, this is what's going on. And then, so that they could be apprised of any decisions that they had to make, and then we cut loose. So yeah, that's how, and so you can, this can, the code, and again, you guys may not need to meet that frequently. We did that for a discrete period of time, right? Now they function like any other board, they meet quarterly, so it's not that, but there was a discrete period of time where the meetings had to be held once a week, just to keep up with everything that was going on. I mean, that was when we were in the most intense part of the planning process. You know, when we had literally outreach activities happening almost every day. So yeah, there was a lot of activity happening that we needed the executive committee to keep track of. So then you have the leadership board, which is the big decision-making body. That was wide open for anybody to participate in, community members, developers, lenders, the other state agencies, city and state agencies for responsible housing. Everybody was playing there, and that was a wide open table that they met once a month and talked about, again, the goals. You know, they kind of practiced some of the goals, reinforced them, refined them, reviewed things, the action plans that will be coming out annually. And now they have evolved into an advisory board, right? So they review things, discuss, debate, hear presentations about information like you guys did this morning, about new policies. It's a ground to have these really difficult, thorny conversations. Then we have our community engagement working group. So we broke that down. So you've got the executive committee, the leadership board, large, there are literally hundreds of people on the leadership board, hundreds. Then you broke it down into 3 working groups underneath that. Community engagement, and so some people serve on both, or some people serve on multiple groups, or they just serve on one. So you've got community engagement, a group of people focused on how do you get community to participate in this, right? The kind of meeting schedule you're talking about is a meeting schedule that people who do this for a living can handle, right? This is I was a developer at the time. You got director of OCD, the redevelopment authority, your housing authority, planners, all of those developers, all of those people, even the philanthropy, the other nonprofit leaders who want to participate. And that's one part I want to make sure. One of the things that we talked about with the leadership board is that's also a really good place to recruit your intersectional partners. You guys talked about the issues with food stamps. So you're going to have partners there are people who focus on those things. You want them to understand how the housing component makes their job harder. So we invited them to participate in the leadership board so that it would have been, how interesting would it have been to have a food service partner or a transit partner hear the presentation about ADU.
Or a health partner.
Or a health partner, so that they can understand what's coming, because the housing is so bleeding amorphous. Most of them have no clue what's going on, right? So you want to get their engagement, but you also want to educate them. You want to make sure that they understand what's going on. That's why there's so many people on the leadership board.
How many on the leadership board?
Oh, you're answering her question. Then I'm going to pause this and let you guys go through the line, get your food. We'll talk about that, but go ahead and answer that question, and we'll keep talking.
Last count, there are 200. We're doing the count again right now. 200. 200. Oh yeah, no, there's over 200 organizations.
Wow.
On the leadership board. We have about 330 people.
So I see that, I see that functionally, and we can debate whether or not it works well or not, like the homeless caucus. So you have the actual commission, you have the continuum of care, but they also have the homeless.
The Council on Ending Homelessness, then you've got the other
continuum care, they have the other group that essentially, that is anybody who wants to be a part of that, comes to that, but all that same information, this stuff that was decided on or discussed in continuing care meetings, they discuss that in those homeless caucus meetings where you got all the other folks in those as well. But that, I'm just trying to figure out a comparative, and there's a bunch of people there. The problem with that, I don't know, and we can talk, there's no decision making at that.
No, that's right.
Is there decision making?
Nope, you know, again, it's education and engagement, they can offer, and you can offer ideas, absolutely, like you'll have a conversation about something like ADUs.
John's like, I'm confused.
No, I'm not confused. I'm just wondering about the management of that.
We're gonna get to that.
She'll answer that for you.
Yeah, we're gonna get to them, we haven't got to them yet.
Okay, let's pause a minute.
I'm a nibbler. So y'all were asking the question, I'm gonna go back to community. So we broke down the work process into 3 different groups, right? So we still haven't talked about how decisions get made yet because we get involved on this one. So we had the leadership board, all of these folks coming together, talking about the different policies, the different initiatives, things like that. How do we get community engaged? How do we keep them engaged? What does that look like? And the community engagement group actually broke off and came up with strategies. We actually trained community volunteers to go to neighborhood associations to talk about the planning process. Then we also had the data working group, again, set of folks who were concerned about the data. So you hear conversations, right? Not conversations, things where issues would come up, challenges would arise around data that would be given to the data working group for them to address, and as well as they were also responsible for doing an effective assessment of the state of housing at that time, right? Which is not something that anybody had ever done. You have different reporting requirements. Your agencies will provide different information in their reports to HUD, in their reports to council, but no one had ever put everything in one place. And so the data working group was putting that together. Then the policy working group, right? So what different strategies, where does this stuff need to live? What needs to go to your planning commission? What needs to be done by the city? What needs to be done by city council as a matter of ordinance? What has to be done by the state as a matter of legislation? Because you've got preemption policies that stop localities from doing certain things, and dealing with all of that and researching it, right? Researching, still not making decisions, researching best practices, discussing, debating them, and making recommendations. And so here comes the decision-making process, right? So what we heard from the community engagement working group, and you guys don't have to go through all of this, you can learn from us and adopt something that makes sense. We heard from community engagement is like, people don't want to come to all these town meetings, right? You have to have all of these meetings, right? You have to have this level of debate and discussion, but regular folks can't come sit there and deal with all of this stuff to the level that was necessary. So we've got to build in, we've got to build in a process that includes community. So we did it in twofold. Again, the folks that we had trained to affect leadership, we call them the community ambassadors. They went out to neighborhood associations and met with them and talked to them, made some preliminary data presentations to talk to them about what does affordable housing mean. And guess how much we actually have in New Orleans? Not a lot. That meets that 30% rule. How many of you actually meet that 30% rule? And so talking to them about it and having them go, oh, well, yeah, I guess I can afford my housing, right? And to destigmatize it. And then inviting them to participate in a series of the community engagement working group designed a series of engagements for them. What we called, we did them based on city council districts, and so that they can come and hear the preliminary policy recommendations and provide input onto those recommendations. We also went out and had a street team and surveyed people. They went to Jazz Fest, they went to Second Lines, they went to activities. We also further designated vulnerable populations that we needed to target, right? The unlikely suspects, right? The professional meeting goers will always show up, be they paid for it or they're older volunteers who've retired. And again, a lot of those folks can be NIMBY folks, but a lot of them are not truly representative of who needs particularly subsidized housing. So how do you get to those folks? So we designed a series of engagements to make sure that we could talk to those people, collect information for them. We did surveys to collect for them. And then we had these community-based presentations of the policy recommendations, took all of that back, distilled it, and the policy working group then sat down and took everything, the recommendations that we heard from community, and started assembling priorities based on what they heard. They set out a set of action plans and said, this is what we think you heard. This is what we've talked to the people responsible, right? So again, if we were thinking about expanding the ADU program or doing something else to it, who would need to be responsible? You gotta talk to your zoning folks. You can't have that conversation without them. Community wants X. The planning department's gotta come in and say, well, X is not necessarily possible. Here are some alternatives. So you're you're hearing their desires, and you're making a judgment. We went back after all that process was done. So we were talking about the housing authority, the state housing finance agency, the city departments, the banks, right? What are we asking them to do? We had a lenders roundtable convened to talk to the banks and said, hey, this is what community wants. Can you guys do these things, right? Can you create different products that help low to moderate income landlords refinance their properties, right? This is what everybody needs. And folks say, yes, no, maybe so, I don't know. We laid all of that out and we went back out to community again and said, this is what we heard you say. And this is what the people who are responsible can and can't do. What do you think? They responded, that information was again taken in, and we realized that we needed a group of people who would be responsible for making the final decisions, right? So you have a very iterative process right there where you're hearing from community, but you can't keep going back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. We, as we've been recruiting and talking to people, we offer folks a position on our community review team. And I say position because it is a paid position. We actually compensate our community review team members as if they are consultants, and they make the final decision. So you have all of this back and forth. Everybody has a chance to input. The people responsible get to say what they can and can't do. Community gets to hear whether or not that's good enough, and also it's helpful for community to hear when things are not possible, right? If you've asked for example, we want a restriction on multifamily units in our building. Well, we can't do that because that's a violation of fair housing law, right? Or it's something innocuous like that, right? Or something like, oh no, we can't actually set it up where we can only build single family units, and I'm trying to do something that's not accidentally a fair housing violation. People ask for unrealistic things sometimes, right? Because sometimes they just don't understand how the rules work. And so this process it is our intention to make sure that they understand why the answer is no. And sometimes it also pushes the city and state agencies who don't necessarily want to do some of these things. Now, I'll give you an example of that. It didn't come from community, it came from one of the advocacy partners. Our housing authority has a problem with the concentration of its vouchers. They are not often, unsurprisingly, they're not in what they call high opportunity areas a lot for a number of reasons. There are programs that HUD runs that housing authorities can opt into that will give them additional resources to do navigation services, counseling to help people get into those neighborhoods. And so our Fair Housing agency, our Fair Housing Action Center, wanted that one of their requests was the housing authority should enroll in this program. And the housing authority said, we don't want to enroll in that program because HUD's version of this is actually about to be discontinued. They're not providing any support in it. And so we don't want to do that. And so there was a real tension point there because the Fair Housing Action Center was like, they were like, we want you to say that you're going to enroll in this program. And the housing authority is like, look, we will do this. We will hire the navigation coordinator for our residents, and we'll do this aggressive outreach, but we're not enrolling in this program. And so we're like, okay, wait. They're gonna do the base parts of the program. Isn't that good? Right? And so doesn't that really get to what you want? Don't you really want them to do it as opposed to enrolling in a program that they're telling you isn't going to work? And so those are the kind of things that you have to have some negotiations around. So the community review team is compensated for their time. We had also started hiring them before that because we had realized that we need to make sure that our documents were readable to people, right? Like we write things in very wonky language sometimes that the layperson just doesn't understand. And you don't insult people by not explaining it, but you also don't use a bunch of jargon that nobody understands except for the people who write this stuff. So the review team had been engaged for that purpose early on. And so the decision was made that, and again, this was all kind of consensus driven, like we think the community review team and also our funder was saying, y'all need to have an equity process, right? There needs to be a way that we can guarantee that community doesn't get short. Yes, you're having all these wonderful meetings, we're paying for this, we think this is amazing, but y'all know and we know that community can't hang in all of these meetings. You know that. So let's stop pretending that they can. And what process can you come up with to guarantee that community has the first and the last word? And that was the review team.
And how many was on the community review team?
So we fluctuate anywhere between 12 and 24 right now.
Really?
Yeah. Initially, when we first got started, we had about 20.
And the pay that you give them is based on what?
So we give them $50 gift cards for every session that they, for every 2-hour session that they participate in.
What kind of budget?
So when we started, when this first started, the funder actually had $35,000 for this. And I don't think I told y'all this story. So when the Foundation for Louisiana, that's our executive CEO right there, Roselle Daniels Point.
I'm sorry, 35 for the gate.
For the whole plan.
The whole plan.
When it started.
Just start.
We can handle that.
Go ahead.
Yeah. So the Foundation for Louisiana started this initiative called, they wanted to do an equity initiative around these different subject matters. So transportation, housing, criminal justice. And what they would do was, the Together Initiative was the name of it. They started out and they said, they're going to bring community and subject matter experts and professional advocates together on a Saturday, to talk about these issues and come up with a plan to work on things. The first year we did a black guy in the housing piece. The second year we were working on thinking about maybe doing a pilot for a rental registry program. And I called the CEO because my organization, the know-how, was going to run point on it. And we're C4, it's a C4. And they only want to fund C3s as a fiscal agent. So I was calling the CEO to say, hey, can we do something else so that the know-how can be the fiscal agent? And he said, yeah, we can figure something out. What are y'all doing? And I told him the rental registry pilot. He's like, well, how does that fit inside the housing plan? And I'm like, you know, we don't have a housing plan, Roselle. He's like, wouldn't it be a better use of everybody's time? And I'm like, well, are they gonna let us do a housing plan? Or do you really need someone's permission? I'm like, well, I guess not, if you say it like that. I said, well, $35,000 isn't enough money for a housing plan. And he said, well, what is? I said, well, I know it's not $35,000. And so he said, well, can you figure out what it is? And if you figure out what it is and you guys want to do it, we'll fund that. We'll help you figure out how to fund that. And that is how this got started. So the first year's plan, Paul, to answer your question, what we spent over that 14 months that resulted in the 10-year plan was closer to $280,000. And it went from $35,000 to $280,000.
And one funder funded that?
No. So after they put up $65,000.
Foundation for Louisiana.
Foundation for Louisiana put up $65,000. And well, I'm trying to remember, 65, the first iteration? Yes, because then they started funding they've done more than that over time because they funded the sustainability pieces. So 65,000 was what they came up with. And then we went to the Ford Foundation who covered the rest.
And we had city at some point and some of the banks.
Right.
Somebody.
Yes, and whatever. Well, some of them gave money to FFL to pick up their 65,000, and then yes, we had a couple. Capital One, that's right, Capital One, and then the city of New Orleans actually covered some in-kind pieces. Some of the work that was done. So that's how we covered it. But
It sounds like, this is way down in the weeds, but talking about taking in all of this input, distilling it down, presenting it back out, sounds like you need like really specialized teams to be able to accomplish that.
Yep.
How do you create that? I mean, how did you create that out of the
So,
vacuum?
part of it was helpful that the know-how had infrastructure and had staff.
Do you need to maybe tell who the know-how is?
Sorry, the Greater New Orleans Housing Alliance. I'm the president and the chair, so I was doing that on top of my full-time job, and we had staff. And we were able to expand using this money and also add consultants. We hired a set of consultants who actually supported the community engagement team, helped them, because then people needed to get training as facilitators.
Were they local consultants or did you bring in specialists?
Look, everybody was local. Everybody was local. Because and you look at it was funny because we had some people, one of Marla's former teammates actually. We have a local consulting firm, and you guys will have these here, who think that they can do all of these different things, the plans in the box, right, kind of concept. And the fact of the matter is that their community engagement component is more check the box than it is innovative and things like that. There's also some of them know how to do the policy work and the technical writing that's going to be necessary to make sure that you're dotting the lines and crossing all the T's. So we hired 2 different consultants to do some of the data analysis as well. And one thing that worked with that was the company that we hired had a contract with the housing authority, and getting housing authority data can be tricky, particularly Section 8 residence data. They are actually prohibited by federal law from revealing that someone is a voucher holder. So they can tell you how many vouchers are in a zip code or in a census tract, but they can't give you individual addresses.
Did they use census data to find out how many people were at the 30% level?
So yeah, the census actually tracks that. They ask those questions. Yeah, so they ask you how much you made, how much you're paying in rent, and then they do the math on how many people in your community are cost burden. So that is what we did. This is, and I would suggest that you guys use some of the broad frames. And I would suggest that you learn. You don't have to do, you don't have to go by learning. If you don't have to do the community review team model, you guys can figure out what your decision-making model is going to look like. Based on what you want to do. We prioritize and just making sure that the people most affected by this are the ones deciding who goes first and who goes second, because that's the other reason why we had to do this. You can't do, this was at the tail that Housing NOLA officially became the plan for New Orleans in 2015. That was the 10-year anniversary of Hurricane Katrina, and we were effectively out of recovery dollars, right? So, and it would have been helpful if we had it at the beginning of the recovery process, and we could have been better stewards of those funds, because we spent $9 billion in New Orleans alone and managed to create a housing market that was more inequitable than the one that we had before the hurricane. So, bad on us, right? That's one of the reasons why we had to come up with the plan, because we fumbled the bag. The money got spent.
Well, and it also speaks to that money alone doesn't solve the problem.
That's right. That's right. Exactly. So you guys don't have that impetus, right? You don't have that pressure, but you do have the same thing that New Orleans had at 2015, which is oh, not all the money you could ever imagine to fix one problem, the money you have to address this problem. So that means somebody has to go first and somebody has to go last. And you can't, it's not equitable to pretend that that's not the case. If that is in fact the case, you're going to have to prioritize things. Things are going to go first, things are going to go second. And who gets to decide that? And an equitable strategy, we decided to do this. That doesn't mean that you guys can't come up with an equitable strategy that doesn't have community, you know, I mean, again, we have to invest a lot in our community review team members to make sure that they can participate in them and continue to invest in them over time. We're comfortable with that. That's not what you guys have to do.
And your community review team, who screened the people that were selected? I mean, who decided they were qualified to do the review?
So we don't screen them for qualifications. We screen them for disqualifying factors, right? So, and what I mean by disqualifying factors is like, so you can't work for the city. You can't work as a housing developer, it's too much inside baseball, right? You can work for an intersecting nonprofit, you can work for, you can't work for any city agency because you're inside a person, it's like that. Right. So we screen them for that, and then we invest in them to make sure that they have the train, you know, they understand that, because initially, remember, they were engaged to read documents and review them. So you gotta have basic literacy and things like that. So that helps. They're understood that they're here to read documents and to make recommendations and to make decisions. And then the further we've added over the years, some further disqualification metrics. How often can you attend, and if there are any other challenges, because you're working with folks. Most of them are, we got a couple of landlords, some vulnerable populations, people who are formerly homeless, couple people who, one person who is still homeless, and she is actually moving off the community review team. We have engaged the services of a social worker, so if someone is in crisis, because that happens, they can, you know, kind of be moved into a diversion program where, because they're coming, you know, you got to make sure how you know they're not coming for the money, right? That's always the question that gets asked when you pay community members to do this kind of work. My philosophy personally is I'm getting paid to care about the community. So we are facilitating their participation. You're recognizing that they have other concerns, the real life concerns, like how are they going to eat? How are they going to get their kids to school? Right. And what we're paying them helps them address that concern so that they can have the time to do this, right? Oh, but that doesn't mean that everybody's going to not come. People are not going to just come there and sit there. Right. And I had one person come once, so we have an orientation process, right? You have to come in and you have to understand that you're going to be asked to do work. Like the woman who's she's not being asked to leave, but she's going to be going through a diversion process because she's got some real issues. She is homeless. We've been trying to help her, you know, find housing, and she's has some other issues that make that really challenging. Hence the reason we engaged a social worker in the first place. And then she started inviting other people to come, and she recruited some really great people. And then she started inviting people to come so she could get their gift cards. Right. Now, this is so sad because it was obvious, and so not malicious, but kind of sad and obvious. They actually told us what they were doing. Oh, I'm here, so I'm going to give such and such my gift card. Get it. It's like, no. Yeah.
But that's the stuff that you deal with sometimes with
right. Yeah. You're like, so just so you're clear, you're going to be asked to work. What you do with your gift card after you're asked to do the work that I've asked you to do, that's on you. Yeah. That was enough when they went to the orientation, it's like, listen, just so you understand, you're going to be sent documents ahead of time that you're expected to read. You're going to have to contribute, and that's why you get your gift card. And if you do all this work and you still want to give somebody else your gift card, then and then those people, then they don't come back.
Right, I got you.
And so after that, that's when we said, listen, we need to talk to you about this. These folks have said that you recruited them for this purpose, you can't do that.
Right.
So you build in those kinds of, so again.
I was just curious about how that group of people came together and who, you know.
They were volunteers. A lot of them just showed up at the meetings. They heard what we were doing. One woman walked in our door and she said, I see y'all have housing on your name. What y'all doing here? Because she's a former drug addict, former incarcerated woman. And she's like, I'm struggling with my housing and I want to help. And she's gone to speak at the State House and testify on policies. I mean, she's a tremendous advocate.
Good.
And again, we've invested in her in that, providing her with training and things like that. So yeah.
Okay. I just wanted to ask another, I guess this is a background question. Has the city ever engaged in any, not whether it's affordable or not, but any kind of housing planning at all in the past 15? So what happened with those efforts? What was that group called and what was the result?
So y'all have these we talked about last time.
Well, no, some of those, no, for the reason that Ryan asked about, you know, the perpetuity of this group, has there been a similar type group assembled for the city of Winston-Salem to look at housing in general or affordable housing in particular in the past?
Not from a group standpoint, I say, but the closest thing to it was the last thing is the enterprise housing study and needs assessment, which has its pros and cons of what we got out of it, but if they did do a tremendous amount of community engagement conversations that happen with that, and city paid, I think that was $100,000 what that paid.
Really?
But no actual group that you have any kind of conversation like this, no.
Okay. How long ago was the housing study done?
3 years ago.
Okay, so I'm thinking, okay. That was in anticipation, but this was a result of some of that, you think, or?
Right, yeah. So that started us. So we had the housing study and needs assessment. Then we did the Center for Community Progress Vacant and Blighted report. Then we did the one at the top for everyone home. And all of it was with the eye towards, you know, what is the state of housing in Winston-Salem,
right,
and what do we do about it? Okay. Right, so that's kind of like the culmination of getting us here today. You'll see third from the bottom, COC assessment. We did a request for proposals a couple of months ago for an entity to actually do an assessment of our homeless ecosystem. And we interviewed a group a couple of days ago and have made a selection. And so one of the things that was included in that proposal, that request, was that those consultants at some point intersect and be a part of this conversation, because we didn't want issues around homelessness to be in a silo. You know, the issue is a lack of housing, right? And so we recognize that all of that needs to be part of this conversation, and that is not siloed. So we made it a requirement that they actually engage in this process as well, so that all of this comes together.
And is COC the continuum of care?
Yes.
But that's just for housing. I mean, because COC
homelessness.
Okay.
Yeah, that's homelessness.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, but it's been basically in its own little silo.
Yeah, it has.
Yeah, and the whole thing about this is housing.
Right.
Yeah, so it needed to be a part of it.
Right.
So that hopefully they'll be able to get started on their work next month.
Okay.
We just have to go through the contracting process now. So we'll have a number of things that kind of fold into each other. We still probably need to get Hall's annual plans and, you know, see what the latest is with NCHFA, you know, stuff like that. But we kind of laid some foundation with the idea that eventually we'd have this larger conversation, you know, because we do have to figure out at the end of the day, we know we have a need for 14,000 to 16,000 units of housing. How are we going to get there?
Right. Oh, yeah.
And so we have to figure out, okay, what would be some annual goals of production and preservation, you know, because we have some naturally occurring affordable housing. We have to save it. You know, we can't build everything back new. So how do we save what we have? How do we build new? But also, what are the opportunities to adaptively reuse some buildings that are just sitting here? right? So, but we got to have some targets and we got to figure out how we're gonna fund it. So we've got to have.
So
this
did one of these entities or efforts here lead to, I guess, 3 years ago when the city did the state of the city and they had the meeting at the Art Center about, and Alan joins and others talk about what the state of the city was, and this is what a 16,700 something, Evan Raleigh reported, and that. So, but did any of these entities, did the information from these entities feed that report that was given to the community at that time? That developed this 16?
I guess
that was the first time we heard that the number of units the city was short.
So that was from that enterprise study.
Okay, but that was what was presented at that state of the. Were you here when the state of the city?
I was here. Yeah, I was here, but I didn't get to attend that. But that was soon after I got here because the enterprise study was done my first year.
Okay, but that's where that information came from. Okay.
So, Paul, I was in a meeting the other day and there was a conversation about reconstruction. I guess that was about existing housing. So we don't have a report on that yet, right? In terms of what exists as it relates to existing housing that could be rehabbed and put back in.
Because one of the things that we're going to have to.
That's a data need.
Yeah, and one of the other things that's going to factor into this. Oh, yeah, I need to talk to you about that. But one of the other missing pieces that is going to be touchy, but we're going to have to tackle it, and that's the properties that are landlord held that are blighted. All right, somewhere in here we're going to have to have a conversation about it. I'm not saying that we're going to have a solution, but that plays a huge role in some of the challenges that we're having in our communities, especially some of our older challenged communities. Our landlords.
Yeah, and they pay far too much for those dilapidated.
Are you saying people are in, or are you vacant ones, or both?
No, I'm talking about what people are in.
Oh,
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, because we've got some neighborhoods, almost 2/3 of their stock is rental, and a lot of that is in really bad condition. And it just makes it difficult to lift up a neighborhood when you have that kind of situation. So I think that at some point along the way, that's a topic we're going to have to talk about. Like I said, I don't know what the solutions will be. And I think some of the solutions may have to come actually from the General Assembly, because that maybe gets back to this whole thing around rental registries and other things.
That's a policy.
Correct. But
that's going to be interesting because some of you may have seen the report, or it's been on national news about this is the housing market in general and across the country, not just locally, about how equity funds are being put together to actually buy homes that are for sale, because these equity creators know that rental is the way housing is going. So I'd be curious about how you can develop policies locally that impacts the sale and the sale or the purchase of housing and what it can be used for, no matter where it's located.
Yeah, all these hedge fund folks and everything.
Right.
Yeah, and are we regulating anything in terms of?
No,
I don't know how you do that.
In North Carolina, I'm just saying, North Carolina, the cities don't have any authority to do anything like that.
I mean,
And how are we being impacted? Do we know this?
Oh yeah, well, I can just tell you now in Boston, Thurman, I mean, there are 25, 30 homes at a time being bought by outside investors that are holding the properties for, rental.
And I know it's outside what we are, but that's from a policy standpoint, that in my opinion, so equity folks have been investing in neighborhoods doing this for some time. And we've seen increased returns, particularly when normally they're putting money in the market, they're seeing much better returns on the housing side, and they're shifting to that. But this year in particular, you've seen much more dollars come into that arena, because this is the last year under opportunity zones that you're able to get the max return from investing your funds. You can still get it after this year, but after this year it goes down on what you're able to get. So you're seeing a lot of these folks just look at where can we put our money, where can we invest these funds, and it's ended up in neighborhoods and in residential.
So that's what I was getting back to your point, Marla, as far as how I mean, these units that are neighborhood that's 80% rental or whatever, and you can't fix them up unless they're code violations kind of thing, or, you know, so I guess, and I don't want to, again, this is where I was talking about, and when you talked about the quality of life thing, sometimes, you know, if you can't make a owner do something because they're barely meeting code, but you know that's not good enough for that community, you know, what recourse do we have to help improve that situation?
Right. And I think for generally speaking, that's where we have to, and I like to tease us about being the city of arts and innovation. That's where we really have to get creative. We look around, see what some other examples can be around the country. But I think if we start from a position of saying, we can figure this out, then it's just a matter of us doing that.
Right.
And I do believe, you know, in some respects, it will require some serious advocacy in Raleigh, right? But it starts with there's got to be a solution. And maybe I'm just terribly naive to be a person of my age, but I am just convinced that you can figure it out. It's going to take some time maybe, and it might be a little difficult, but I just keep thinking, a lot of this stuff we can figure out. It's just a matter of time.
And sometimes it could be, and I know this is utopic probably, but if you can find, just by the same token of these equity funds that are being created for, and they're for-profit motives, if there are some angels or mission-related equity funds that are created for the right reasons, that would be a competitive way to do that.
Absolutely, and I am familiar with some. There's a group that I get information from, Mission Driven something, I forget the name of them. They just emailed me the other day, hey, we haven't heard from you. So there are groups, you got CDFIs out
right,
there.
exactly.
You know, so what do we put together in terms of a particular program or strategy that we pitch to some of them, right? So we can figure it out. We just have to take a little time to think it through.
And to the app, and again, on the policy piece, that the advocacy, what we have to do, even though it's on the federal side, and states could have put in additional regulation, but they didn't, in terms of the opportunity zone component. But this runs out. And so you look at reauthorizing it in some form, there needs to be advocacy in that conversation, because they pulled out the community good safeguards on the investment. So like with, I think, not low income tax credit, but it's new market tax credit required you to have some type of community good in the opportunity zone. You did not have a requirement for community good. So
Well, I think you have to have community good also in low-income housing tax credits too. I think there's some portion of the scoring
inherent in the program.
Correct.
That you know, what the affordability standard has to be for new markets, more of an economic development thing, so they overlay that to make sure that the job creation and things are for communities.
That's right. That's exactly right. I mean, but to Durham's point is that, again, the presumption is that some person, the opportunity zone projects in particular, is that, that you're investing in a neighborhood that has had disinvestment is in and of itself a good thing, without measuring, well, are you going to accidentally gentrify this neighborhood? Is the investment one that actually doesn't benefit the people who live there? It might just increase their cost value. I mean, their prices and lead to displacement or other inconveniences for them. The opportunity zones is just like, you're spending money there, and there's a need that, again, that's where the equitable lens comes in, right? Because so much of our investments, including LIHTC deals, right? This is a vacant piece of land, and it's going to be affordable housing. And why is the land vacant, right? Is it a neighborhood that really, yes, there are a lot of poor people there already living in substandard housing, and putting more poor people there in better housing sounds like a good idea, but it might not in fact be one. That was something that we grappled with, because you get a lot of, especially in communities of color, you get neighbors feeling like their neighborhood is quote unquote a dumping ground for subsidized housing. And you've got to have that hard conversation, right? And again, that's where the equity lens comes in. You got to be able to have the racial reconciliation conversation and say to people of color, okay, what you're saying is inflammatory, what you're saying is insulting, what you're saying is problematic, but let's talk about the thing that you're really concerned about, right? And the thing that we all agree on is that this neighborhood doesn't have what it needs, and increasing the number of poor people without jobs, transit, is not a good idea. Without disparaging those people.
But
Right.
then people think mixed income development is about gentrification.
Right, no, exactly, and exactly, because it can be, I mean, what ends up happening, it very much can be, if you're not intentional, if you just say, we're gonna put a Starbucks or a Whole Foods in this neighborhood, and not say, okay, by the way, Starbucks,
You need to employ some of the people.
are you going to employ the people who work here, or Whole Foods? Are you going to employ the people who work in this neighborhood? Are you also going to manage your prices so that people in this neighborhood who can walk to this grocery store can actually shop here, instead of having folks fly in from other neighborhoods to take advantage of your fresh produce and your other wonderful things? You know, you can, that's the kind of conversations you have to have. And it's something that sometimes, another reason why, to the earlier point, this has to be a mixed piece, because the economic development department, for example, they don't care about any of that. They want to notch that belt. We got Starbucks, we got Whole Foods, we got in Louisiana, we have a stretch of communities actually where I'm from called Cancer Alley. It has a huge concentration of petrochemical plants. It also used to be where a lot of the plantations were. So it used to be sugarcane country. Well, it still is sugarcane country, but now it's a home to, for example, my home parish, St. John the Baptist. They have incentivized all of these petrochemical plants that are putting out pollutants. They also pay pretty well, but we have the unfortunate distinction of having more tax exempt business land in my parish, in my home parish, than the entire state of Texas. And 2 of the parishes have that, right? And so, and parishes, they're like counties, right? You use parishes, y'all use counties. So these are not big, there's nothing in Louisiana that's bigger than Texas, right? And so you're talking about 2 parishes that each of them have more tax exempt business land for petrochemical companies than the entire state of Texas, because we've incentivized these businesses to come there, park along our river, use the river to get their goods and services, their goods out. And they are contributing to polluting the community, right? So our economic development partners love bragging when they bring new petrochemical companies to a community called Cancer Alley. Oh, look, we're getting a $9 billion investment in another petrochemical company. So, and the community is like, why are you celebrating? We don't want any more of this stuff here. So that's why you gotta have these harder cuts, because again, it's just gonna be people, and they don't mean any harm. They're just not thinking about the long-term consequences, and this is what this dares to do. So
Let's do our time check, because we're getting close.
We're getting close. So what we want to talk about is get some ideas from you guys. We've got some of the data needs stuff that we've talked about already. What I would like to do with the last 20 minutes that we have Paula and Joe Brewer and really everybody is talk about what your structure looks like. Like what do you want to see? Do you think the Affordable Housing Coalition is ready to morph into an executive committee / the decision-making body? And again, because the Affordable Housing Coalition is the decision-making body. And then you have, I would recommend that you guys talked about this already, the data working group at a minimum. I think you guys have already kind of come to your own conclusions that what you want to do is work with the people who are already doing this and get them connected under this. That's what makes sense. And we're going to talk community engagement tomorrow, making sure that process is going. And then how do you want to handle policy is the other decision that you guys have to make. So Does the Affordable Housing Coalition?
What was it? So tomorrow at 10, we're meeting at Haynes Hosiery. And we're gonna have community folk come in to, for Andrenica to also have a conversation.
All right, so who's meeting? So is it the coalition meeting at 10? What's the meeting tomorrow at 10 o'clock?
It's just an opportunity, yeah, just to start having conversations with people in the
about
community.
engagement. Okay.
Right.
But people in community.
Would any of them be
People there.
right?
So I don't know what the agenda looks like, but we've invited people from the Neighborhood Association Coalition, the Housing Now, the Refugee Housing Coalition, NBN, Folks for Good Housing, WS Rise, and Advisory Board of P4P.
It's just designed to, like some of the similar meetings you have, y'all introducing them to the concept and hearing from them about what they would want to see. Like you guys need to hear from them what they can and don't want to do and what they would demand of the body. How, you know, how much, because y'all are gonna have to make space for them inside of this, and they gotta tell you what that looks like.
So who from the coalition is at that meeting tomorrow? Is that's
Anybody who can come.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it wasn't like a, yeah, Paula, because I kind of had to defer to Paula on how to get people to the table. But yeah, anybody who can come, we would love for you to be there. But, you know, we figured we'd leverage Andronica's time because we knew community engagement was so big to build in a piece for that. So I just wanted to make sure I mentioned that.
Yeah.
I can see the questions in your eyes.
Well, I didn't know. That's
okay.
I knew I couldn't make it. I just wasn't sure what was going to be going on. So. Well, I hope somebody does.
Yeah.
Good to listen.
So again, get back. And again, we don't have to make a decision today, but I do want you thinking. What's the decision-making structure? Community engagement is gonna be some version of it as a subcommittee almost. We'll figure out what that looks like. Data working group, you guys have basically made a decision about that. How do you want to handle your discussions around policy and what is your decision-making process? Is the Affordable Housing Coalition prepared to lead this work? You have been, but you know, you guys gotta commit.
And probably from a decision-making standpoint, and this gets a little tricky because the coalition's commitment is appointed by the city council. But
is that enough, right?
But I suspect that in order to really get some of the work done and have some of the ideas and some other subject matter expertise, you probably need a group that brings some of that to the table that isn't already a part of the coalition.
Right.
So that's part of the conversation is, does it completely rest or reside within the coalition, or is it an entity plus? Exactly, coalition plus.
Yeah, I was gonna say that to that end, I think the coalition can be with an expanded table. I don't, as the table is this now, I don't think so, and not because folks are not able, but I don't think that it will be the right representation of the community. To say that it's doing the whole full week.
Okay, that makes sense. That makes total sense. And do you think that larger group would also be able to kind of distill policy or discuss policy, or do you want to have it where the coalition plus, that's what we're gonna call it for right now, the coalition C plus. And again, like they start having, like you guys did this today, you reviewed policy today. You discussed, you talked about supporting, and I get that that's because your body has other requirements, but would the expanded group also be a good place for that, or would you want to have a separate piece to talk about policy and then make recommendations to the larger table?
I think it would be good to have a larger group, but I think of it in the sense of, you know, going back to the ADU example, like if that was something that we were supportive of, we could lift that up. But if you had other people around the table that were also supportive, then maybe you're getting 2, 3, 4, 5 letters of support from different. It doesn't have to all come from one voice per se, but having everybody there can create a unifying message.
Gotcha.
So the larger table, and I hate to be the questioner, but for the larger table, how much larger? What sectors aren't represented or stakeholders aren't represented that need to be represented? Where do you stop? I mean, does it need to be 20 instead of 12? Does it need to be, 30? Does it need to be 15? Or is only one or two people or no? Yeah, people that need to be. I'm just curious about, and who makes that decision? Is that a city council decision or is that?
I think it starts with you all.
So do we have the ability to
Recommend.
appoint other people to the coalition?
Not necessarily appoint other people to the coalition, but as you think about the work that we're trying to embark upon, you start with the question of what do we need or what's missing?
Right.
And then it is, now, is this the coalition plus, such that what's missing is the plus, and you have just this collaborative entity, if you will, that then kind of takes this and shepherds it, versus are we going to go to council? Can you expand the commission? Then you do the formal appointment. I don't know that would be the solution as much as the coalition plus, and you start to look at what do we need and who's missing, without regard necessarily to any specific set of numbers,
Right.
but who do we need and who's missing?
So, but the coalition plus once the plus are added, they become the coalition, right?
Not necessarily, no.
So this body doesn't change no matter what iteration we add to it.
Not until the council changes the coalition.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Does this body get
So I guess
expanded?
that's the question, that's one of the questions we have to respond to, and answer, or even ask what we want to do. Because that's why I brought up that question earlier, in the sense of, we have the specific mandated things from the council we have to do. But then also, as we talk through this and synthesize, we also have discovered there's work that needs to be effectuated outside of the council commission work. And so I guess one of those questions is, well, what work needs to be effectuated outside, what work needs to be kept in, or does it all need to be one or the other? At least that's what I'm wrestling with, trying to figure out.
I guess when I think, and I agree with you there, and when I think about the council plus or whatever, I think it's occurring outside, and we're plugging in the areas that align with what we've been asked to do. And so maybe it's recommending a policy that we hear there. But to Marlo's point about a lot of this stuff needs to take, I mean, if it takes place outside of the city, it probably needs to also take place outside of the body that's appointed by the city council too, right? We can engage in that discussion, and we can maybe be a stewards and help it get started or move forward, but maybe we're not the shepherds long term.
Right,
Like
and that is, it, again, that's one of the, I use this analogy a lot, this metaphor a lot, and it keeps happening. You're building a plane while you're flying. Most people are inherently uncomfortable with that.
You can tell that, can't you?
Yeah, we do it all the time. Nobody likes doing it all the time, but we do, but people are inherently uncomfortable with that. And you gotta own that. You gotta say, and it's okay, but this is the kind of conversations we wanted to make sure you guys had, because it does evolve. And I will, part of my role to support you guys and Marla through this is to say, like, well, I won't tell you, don't do that. I'll tell you that you don't do something with it. Like, oh no, that's gonna burn everything down. But again, this has to be, it really has to be what Winston-Salem is. Right? And you guys know that better than I ever will. And I'm going to push you all on making sure that community's voice is heard. And again, you're pushing yourselves on a lot of these pieces. The racial equity piece, when you guys look at those are your recommendations around the preliminary goals. That's what you all are seeing because you live here and you love this community. I'm gonna push you to do that all the time. That's gonna be the annoying part. You know what? We can't just skate on this one, no. But it's going to be very uncomfortable. It's just will be.
And I maybe ask to the group the same question in a different way. If we set aside our mandate from the council, and we were looking specifically at what we kind of understand as the needs, and we were positioning something in the community that needs to come up, do we believe, I think it was one of the structures that you had, do we think that one of those structures helps us get to the end goals that we want? I was like the executive committee, the community piece, those things. I'm just trying to think it.
Oh, you mean the list of?
Oh, yeah, but
I'm gonna list
and
it.
I had another, let me pull up this PowerPoint to you guys, because I've got, and I'll send this to Marla so she can share this with you guys as well. But there's one here that we have that, in our early iterations, because they've changed a lot over time. So the leadership board and the working groups, right? And so it lays out how all of that, all the community engagement working group, the data working group, the policy working group. With a little bit more narrative on that. And then you wanted to see, I think. I was sharing it. That, right?
Yeah. And I guess my question is because there's so much in even in the request that we have been given by council that of helping to develop things that just doesn't exist, that we need so many other people are engaged in to do. You know, we were looking on the outside. Do we feel like this type of structure or something similar to this as outside of city government would help begin to move us in that direction? And then if not, or if so, what are the pieces that we think should be added or should be? Because I think to Ryan's point, for the actual council mandated organization or coalition, if we see our role as helping to create, launch, kick off this, we may temporarily serve as, well, an executive committee or something like this in these spaces, helping to engage and maybe find a place to keep the coalition engaged, particularly on the policy pieces, because essentially we are, per the council, who they look to for those policy recommendations. And we need a source to stay engaged with community voice on the thing, on what's happening, what's going on. Right. And so maybe there's a tie-in that says, hey, this is where the long-term piece is, but it's not at the executive committee, or it's not at this place. But again, does it seem like, you know, a structure that could work as an outside group? I know there's a bunch of questions, how you fund it, how you get it, how you do all that. I know all those are there, but just from a.
But is it the right direction? It's the key question you gotta get started with.
If this was sort of a funnel, with that executive committee, you know, where leadership board is pretty broad. But then the executive committee be at the bottom, like that. I mean, that's a smaller group.
Yeah, they're much smaller group. Yeah, much smaller group.
Would the executive committee be like the coalition?
Yeah, it could be, yes, absolutely. I mean, those were the folks who were, again, we said, let's do this. That's what you guys are doing here now. There's more of you. But yes, that's the role that they played. They were the ones saying, let's do this. Because we had that equity component. And then again, can't overstate this, making sure that community can have some say. So that's why they got constrained. Because I will tell you.
Because they're not the ones who make the decisions.
Correct. They make sure the decisions can be made. And that doesn't mean that they don't have any influence. All of my executive committee members serve on the leadership board, none of them serve on the review team, but they make their voices heard inside the process. One of them runs the redevelopment authority, so she participates in the policy working group, and so she says, this is what my agency can and can't do, or this is what my agency can do. But again, recognizing that the decision is going to get made by the community review team. But what she does is, as a board member, is make sure that the community review team, that we have raised enough money to pay the community review team, right? Make sure that we have raised enough money to pay the data analysis folks, right? Because we've got partners that we do that with all the time, so that we can print the plans. That, you know, so they they make it go. And you guys are serving in that role right now. You're starting the conversation. You're saying, let's do this. And one other piece of language that we use that might help you all is that everybody likes that output of a plan, that outcome of a plan, because it's something you can hold on to. You know, you've got a document, you've got all the stuff like that. This is the last printed plan because we've gone all electronic because of COVID. And it's like, people like that, right? But we also wanted to get away from, it's also a process. And that makes people uncomfortable too, but it's a process, and this is one of the outputs of that process. It's one of many.
And the community review team then in this setup of housing NOLA, as you've said, is the decision-making body for all the work that would be done, or the recommendations that go to other authorities or whatever.
That's right. And
that community review team is managed by you?
Well,
the executive director, is there an executive director of this group?
Yes, I'm the executive director.
Okay, so does that, they have to be managed by somebody? I mean, somebody, they don't
they
work autocratically kind of thing, I don't guess.
Right, no, they come, they host, when we pick, they're gonna pick when their meetings are and things like that. But it's my job and my team's job to make sure that there's food, that they have what they need, that they have the staff, exactly. And again, they make priorities and say, okay, this year you're gonna be working on these 20 things. And then we're gonna work on them, right? And come in and update them and say, this is what we're doing, this is how it's going, what do you think, what do you think, what do you think? And they also help us contextualize when we're grading things.
So do they vote? I mean, if there are 12 of them, and there's a recommendation.
We manage them for consensus. So they.
Okay, so it's consensus and not really a 7 to 5 or.
No.
Okay.
And it takes a lot, right? It takes a lot to get managed diverse groups of people to consensus, but we didn't feel like them voting each other. We haven't had problems with too much with people, like the more we have one community review team member now who's a formerly homeless man who happens to be a transplant originally from New Orleans. He also happens to be white, and so he takes up a lot of energy in the room. So we also have a community organizer who is trained in the facilitation processes, because you got to make sure that not too many people take up too much space inside of the room.
So just to understand this structure.
That's why I'm not recommending this. I'm just telling you what we do.
Yeah. So the leadership board here, it says made up of about 200 organizations, 330 people.
Yep.
Then is community engagement just a process, or is that
It's a separate working group.
That's a working group.
That's a separate work.
About how many people?
So that fluctuates as well right now because it went dormant a little bit because so many things were happening in policy and data. And we're actually re-energizing that because we run into a lot of NIMBY neighbors. And you get neighborhood leaders who serve on a leadership board, and everybody signed off on the plan. And then when it's come to your neighborhood to build the affordable house, and they're like, oh, what the heck? Wait a minute, your name is on the plan. What you talking about? Well, we didn't think you meant here. And so the community engagement we have rebranded it called CityWorks. So we're doing a lot of outreach and education to neighborhood associations so that they understand what it means to have affordable housing in their neighborhood, and also to help them learn how to work with developers, because for every NIMBY neighborhood, there's a bad actor developer, right? Somebody who's gonna come in and maybe not put an incinerator next door to your house, but is gonna do something that violates the neighborhood characteristics. So how do you put them on equal footing so that they can talk to each other and get to the best outcome? And so that's why our community engagement work has evolved to that, right?
But you have organizers on staff.
Yes.
But with the community engagement, that's where a lot of your education.
Yes. Oh my God, yes. Oh yeah, yeah. And working with the zoning processes. I mean, that stuff is very, very, I mean, we just had a bad week a couple of weeks ago where one of our neighborhood associations has been pushing, student parking. They needed to make it a problem. They got this interim zoning district put in. So that if you, you built or rehab, you have to have off-street parking for every bedroom on the property. And it's like, we're like, what do you?
Yeah.
We were like, are you kidding us with this? Are you guys serious? This isn't how you do this, right? We get it, you're taking the students. This is not how you handle this. And we're gonna end up having to sue the city, we'll file a fair housing complaint against the city council because they passed it, because they just wanted to appease the neighbors. And like, this is not how you do this.
And, you know, that's I think it's gonna be a big issue for us in terms of, just will. If NIMBYism is, you know, off the chain here, and then city council members have to listen to their constituents,
That's why you need this outside.
then.
That's right.
And that's why you have the community engagement.
That's
That's why
right.
we need the communication strategy.
That's right.
Okay.
Oh,
Bring them
yeah.
all along.
Oh, yeah, yeah. And and oftentimes, and that's why you also want to engage with the neighborhood association. But most of those organizations are not truly representative. No matter who's leading them, no matter what color their skin is, no matter what their background is, you look at, because the average person struggling with these issues does not have time to go to their average neighborhood association meeting, even if they are welcome. Because most neighborhood associations skew homeowners. And that it's and they exclude renters a lot of the time, right? So they don't mean to be inequitable, but they are. And that doesn't mean you ignore them, but you also have to spend time making sure that when you're having these difficult conversations, that the people who are most directly affected, who actually are the majority in some cases, are actually at the table. I'll share with you another initiative that we've been able to do with this is we work closely with public housing. Another NIMBY neighborhood, former public housing site, you know, was damaged with Katrina. Well, it was one of the few that actually was able to return with Katrina. They came back. No, Maison Royal. Okay. Not the big pen, this is one of the little ones. Okay. So the residents, some of the residents were able to come back, Maison Royal. Really small, couple hundred units, that's small for us. Our smallest public housing site were 900 units, right? So this one was a couple hundred, really smallish. They shut it down, they were redeveloping it. The neighborhood was like, oh, we're gonna try and kill this project, yada, yada, yada. They put a lot of pressure on the city council member who was an affordable housing advocate herself. She actually helped found the Greater New Orleans Housing Alliance. And so she's stuck between this rock and a hard place because what a very vocal constituency is fighting against it. And there are problems with the developer, right? The developer has done a terrible job with outreach, done a terrible job with the design. It looks like a prison, right? There's real problems. And what we are trying to pioneer is the public housing residents need to have, who are going to live in the property, need to have equal footing in the council member's ear as the neighborhood association, right? And so we got them to meet with the public housing residents. They have a leadership body, and they told the councilwoman to her face, we think the project's terrible as well from an aesthetic standpoint, but we can't fix it if you kill it. And so she was able to stand up and said, I have spoken to the leaders of public housing. They think that this project as it's designed right now is unacceptable. So she set up a process where they have to list, she passed it. She did conditional, oh my God, what do they call those? When they pass a project and they add all the conditions to it.
Conditional use of.
That's right. And so she said, I'm blanking on the terminology. And she said, you have to talk to these residents and they will tell me whether or not, that's what you have to do in order to do that. And the neighborhood association can participate as well, but we're gonna put the power in the hands of the people who will live in the building so that you're not letting the NIMBY, because the NIMBY people were like, oh, we wanna see a lease. Why? You're not gonna sign it, right? that kind of nonsense. So you can do that. You can, and again, to the point, that's why we're outside and we're able to kind of have that hard conversation, because otherwise, our planning departments were at their wit's end. They're writing all of these reports to the council member explaining how they can make the project work, and countering the neighborhood, right? Doing a really fantastic job countering the neighborhood from a zoning and building perspective. But they weren't able to counter the political, the political considerations, which is a people consideration. And so having the councilwoman meet with prospective voters and voters of hers, so she knows that if she makes the right decision, it's not just we're gonna, people are gonna like her, that she will actually have political support. And it's, again, this is, yes, right. Because that's what, when y'all have these conversations and you just sit there like, the planning department is telling you this is wrong. What are you doing? What are you doing?
Yeah. But it's just, but we're only staff. And there's only so much staff can do.
Right.
Right.
And staff can't have a political conversation, particularly now the council member, they're not gonna be staff long.
That's why I started laughing.
Then you're like, well, what do you want me to tell the council? What do you want me to tell the neighborhood association leader? And the staff is like, you want them to read our report?
Which is wonky, right? So you gotta have that community engagement piece, right?
That's right.
Outside of us, the staff.
So it sounds like you guys,
Joe just kind of had that look like, oh my goodness, this is a lot.
Yeah. I mean, conceptually, I'm just trying to place this all in, not trying to replicate housing NOLA, but just trying to operate locally kind of thing.
that's what
How we're built, I don't know. I've just got some internal thinking that I've got to do.
I feel like one of the reasons it's been so hard is that there's not an organization kind of naturally.
Yeah, exactly, Ryan. I mean, and I'm trying to place this one there, and it just doesn't.
You don't have it.
It just doesn't fit. So and again, like you said, you all began because a foundation said,
right.
and that's not the way this one originated. So just.
But you can get it there. I mean, we can help you all do an assessment of the current market,
The ecosystem.
The ecosystem. You guys know where you want to go. What I keep hearing is you're not sure what pieces are out there that could be folded in and also, or may need to be created from whole cloth. It could be this coalition plus. Do you all have the authority to do that? And as my Lozelle is on my board, so he's one of my board members. I must remind you all that you all have to. You don't need permission to do that. You can't do it. You're already doing it. Right? It's you're uncomfortable and not uncomfortable. You're concerned about this body is established, right? It exists through a very specific mechanism. That's fine. You got to deal with those considerations, but that's letting this evolve to something else. This won't stop that. The council won't stop that. Nobody's going to throw down and say, "Oh my God, these people did this stuff." That's not right.
Plus, I've been through the months. I've been telling council we're working towards creating.
Yeah.
I said sometimes I say a 10-year, sometimes I say a multi-year housing plan. But I have been telling council for months, this is where we're going. This is the work we're starting. So I've already teed it up that something's going to happen. I didn't say it was all going to be owned by the coalition, but that the coalition is the catalyst for this happening. But I've told them something's on the way.
And maybe hearing the voices of the community might help us better make some decisions about this person.
That's true.
The work of this coalition is reported to the council through which committee that the city has structured?
Community development, housing, and general government.
What is it?
Community development,
Okay,
housing,
okay.
and general government committee.
Okay. And what council members serve on the committee?
Mayor Pro Tem Adams is the chairperson. Councilmember Scipio is the vice chair. And we have Kevin Mundy and drawing a blank. It's not McIntosh, is it? Clark. Yeah, Clark is on there.
Okay.
Thanks, Sharon. So, and we have Councilmember Mayor Pro Tem Adams' support. We have her support. She wants to see this. And in different ways, at different points in time, council is asking, what's the plan? What's the plan? What's the
Right,
plan?
yeah.
Yeah, and so, you know, I'm saying to them, well, we're trying to get to creating the plan. And so this will probably be part of that conversation that we're gonna have with them, to kind of let them know where we're going, that we are trying to embark on a plan creation process. But I've also said that whatever is done will have intense community engagement. So I have always said that to them as well, that it will involve community voice. It has to be.
And that's a good thing.
Yes.
That's a good thing.
Yeah, so I've kind of prepped them.
And as I mentioned earlier, and I had a conversation with us, who's not on that committee, but said the same thing about the desire to have that voice outside of council, because they felt concern around this, as they're dealing with content that they have. That it's easy, they're getting territorial on certain things, and they just want to. It's easy to have that voice, and even the talk and the conversation. And I don't know if you all will speak to it, but conversation around potentially allocating the set aside resources and dollars coming in direct for housing. And there's also commentaries that I've heard folks are saying, hey, we gotta have folks on the outside helping to steer these resources, because if we leave it just to the political body, it's going to be politically distributed rather than properly distributed. So just in the sense of how important and impactful this work it is in getting to that.
Sound like a turn.
It's kind of like, what? Turn. All right.
I didn't hear what you said. It's kind of like.
Okay. So what would you say is next for us to kind of process underneath it?
So we can talk to the community engagement folks tomorrow. What we're gonna do is, like I said, do a presentation for them, like we did for you guys a while back, because they don't know anything about any of this.
Right.
Right. So that y'all are considering a housing plan. You guys are familiar with our plan. We can help you all. This is what this looks like, and that there needs to be some input on what this community needs in order to facilitate their participation. Talking about equity, a decision-making process. No decisions have been made other than to move in the direction of getting a plan established. And what do they think? And hearing from them. And what I can do is work with Marlo over the next, y'all meet monthly?
Mm-hmm.
So we can pull something together before the next meeting. I'm thinking we can shoot for November, if not December, but I'm thinking we can shoot for November of like a matrix. I heard questions about who's missing, right? Mm-hmm. From the table, who would need to participate. And Marla I can tell Marla some of the categories, and she can help fill in some of the people, right? And then some other recommendations. And the elephant in the room is the funding piece, right? So we can also help you guys put together a proposal that you can start shopping around to your funders to get that seed money invested, right? Because if you can get started with $35,000, $65,000 to address some of those basic needs, then you can raise, because the money attracts the other money.
Yeah, I was trying to think what local funding entities, and I'm not talking about financial, like banks or anything, but I don't know any of the foundations. No, not you. Even if someone from WF was sitting there and say the same thing. I don't know any of the nonprofit funders that have affordable housing as an emphasis for their.
Which is a problem. And
yeah, that's exactly.
That's the pitch to them. Like you go to them and say
what now? Well, I'm telling you,
they don't know. That's not unique.
You know, KB Reynolds stopped doing it. Oh, this was when Karen McNeil Miller was still here, as a matter of fact, that they never had housing. Yeah, so there's nobody that's doing it from other than the financials.
And then also there is a bill meandering its way at congressional level, supported by Grounded Solutions, that would try to provide communities with seed money for housing plans.
Of
So,
course, and for everyone home was Grounded Solutions.
that's right.
So we're kind of tied into them. But too, part of this gets back to that whole other thing about, yes, you have housing, but what is housing? What is a home, right? And are there ways to frame what this is that actually complements some of what the foundational priorities might be, right? So if they're concerned about the well-being of children or families or this or that, well, one of the things that helps them to be stable, to be healthy, to be whatever, starts with a home, right? And so how do you have the conversation so that they see that this is actually a part of the
And
puzzle?
all of the social determinants that foundations are focusing on are connected.
Correct.
And housing is very much a central.
Correct. Correct.
And that's the way you get to it from a, well, I can only speak for the Cape Girardeau Charitable Trust, but the only way to get to it from the trust perspective is to take it through the health. To be healthy, you need a healthy place to live.
Correct.
And so that's, but they don't have quote affordable housing as an entity without relating it to the, social determinants of health.
Right. And education.
Correct.
I mean, if kids aren't in a stable home.
Right.
They certainly can't perform.
Right.
Well, yeah.
Right.
I mean, this is why, one of the big challenges around this issue is this interest, and it's mind-boggling. I mean, after COVID, again, we told everybody, before you could get a vaccine, the only thing you could do to save your life was
Stay home.
Right.
And you don't have a home.
And if you don't have a home.
Right.
or a quality home, or running water so
You
you
don't
can
have a
wash
right
your
to stay
hands.
home because you're paying so much for rent.
Or you're doubled up with somebody who's an essential worker who's going out every day, and y'all are overcrowded. It should have been the second thing every executive, mayor, county supervisor, governor said when you're gonna stay at home. They should have said, and we're gonna have to help everybody who doesn't have a good home find a home to get us. It is my belief, and there's been some data that backs this up. This is part of the reason COVID is continuing to linger and why we can't get our arms around it, because we're not addressing the underlying housing issues. There were 2 studies done last year that proved every time there was no protections when the eviction moratoriums lapsed, in particular, infections and deaths went up.
So part of this is, while we know housing is central, how do we, as part of the communication strategy and the education strategy, talk about the larger community, social determinants of health and whatever, and in some respects, take it out of its own silo in one respect, right? In order to help folks see the interrelatedness of it. I mean, it's one piece of that larger pie that has to be addressed. So, that speaks so much more to how we have to think about it, how we communicate it, right? And how we educate.
Yeah, I was in an education meeting, and they were talking about these other issues, and one lady said, I don't know why we're talking about these issues. We need to just focus on education. Oh,
But yeah, great.
Yeah, right. She doesn't get the pictures.
Well, no, and a lot of people, do that, and
Well, we're used to working in silos. We have subject matter experts, right? And so people are accustomed to being only on point with their subject matter and in their lane. And so part of this is how do we help people recognize that we're all on the same highway?
Right.
that's right.
Right?
That's right.
Well, we might be in different lanes per se, but we're all on the same highway, hopefully heading in the same direction. We're not having counterflow, right? But, so anyway, I think.
Sometimes we do have counterflow, but no, I mean, that's another good source of data. McKinney-Vento, that's federal policy, right? That provides specific dollars to schools for homeless youth.
Yeah.
And the way they classify homelessness amongst kids is more in line the way that I like to classify it. It's different than what the COCs use. They classify whether or not the kids are they're street homeless, they're in a shelter, they are in a hotel, right? Because a lot of the kids, the parents are trying to do that, or they're doubled up. They recognize that a child being double, living in multiple, it's not multi-generational, it is, we got evicted and we went to stay with grandma in her 1-bedroom apartment. That's doubled up, and again, particularly with COVID, right? When the kids were trying to learn from home, when they were doing, and everybody hated that for a number of reasons, but you also got to talk about if it is necessary, if a child has to be quarantined, is it possible for that child to actually learn from home? Or are they sitting at a kitchen table where there are 4 other adults who because the house is too small? And, that the schools need to embrace this part of it. I mean, again, one problem, it'd be interesting to look at how many of your schools there locally are properly accounting for their McKinney-Vento kids that they're counting now. Because it's another issue. And it's a problem we were having before COVID. We had schools in New Orleans that were bizarrely saying they had no homeless children. That's not possible. Given the categories, that they were doubled up, that they were living in a hotel, that they were street homeless, or that they were shelter homeless. There's not a school in New Orleans that didn't have at least one child, but they would turn in numbers and they would ignore, this is additional funding that I would help you pay for uniforms for those kids, provide them with supportive services, and they would not want to register that. Now that changed with COVID. The schools started reporting the numbers because it was a way of explaining their terrible, not just, they're at home with COVID and they're learning remotely. It's like, but by the way, they're also doubled up. They're homeless. That's also why their grades are in the toilet.
But I think locally, at least before I retired a couple years ago, that Project Hope was what they funded. McKinney-Vento money was used to fund Project Hope, which was a organization that managed, if you would, the homeless children, if you would, kind of thing. So,
yeah.
But other foundations gave to that effort as well around homelessness.
So you got some people. Looking at all of those different pieces could help you. And somebody mentioned health. A lot of the healthcare systems are starting to recognize that it's cheaper to pay rent for a homeless frequent flyer than it is for them coming into their ER. That's right. With a myriad of issues that they have to then treat.
And economically, jobs, people that they want to bring in to work, they can't find housing.
Well, see, when you were talking about the data bank kind of thing, that's what I was going to say the Department of Commerce uses is around some of the economic development things, is around what housing is available for them to go out and recruit industries, not petrochemical, but just those industries that are going to be vital to the economic development of a community or the state. What is housing like around there? So so there are a number. It's just that you don't get the concentration of organizations developing affordable, decent housing to go with that. You can set developers to do that, and developers kind of obviously are out the profit motive. They're not the mission driven.
Well, those folks don't understand the models. That I love that analogy. They don't understand they're actually on the same road as the same highway as this coalition, as Marla and her team. They think that, that's some people over there and they're off to the woods, and we're on the Autobahn, and that's some country road over there that's dealing with the poor people's problem.
Well, I'm sorry, I gotta run. I'm sorry. I stayed as long as I could, kind of thing. And is our regular meeting next Friday?
Well, it would have been, but I don't know if I can do 2 Fridays in a row.
I was hoping not, but I thought I'd ask before
This was to replace next Friday's meeting. Yeah, this was the October meeting.
Okay.
And I think if you look at the calendar, when we should meet again, it's actually the Friday of Thanksgiving week. So then we probably should look at the previous Friday, which might be the 19th, but I'm not 100%.
I think it is the 19th. I think it is the 19th. It's the Friday before Thanksgiving week.
Right. So that would be our next regular meeting time. So,
and so this meeting y'all keep talking about in November for the city of something, is there something that has to be reported? Is this the accessory dwelling unit, I guess?
Oh, the ADU thing. Yeah, that's gonna go on outside of our next meeting, because I think we're gonna get a letter, I get that letter submitted. to the requisite boards.
Okay.
So all of that will be.
So that's nothing we have to meet about between.
No, I think if anything, we'll just circulate the draft to you to make sure, you know, it captures everything that you wanted to say. But it will be independent of our next meeting.
Okay, and you do have that on the 19th. I mean, meeting's already on the calendar for the 19th.
It should be.
It is, that's what I'm saying, it is. I'm confirming that it is on there.
Oh,
Right on
okay,
my
good.
calendar, so yeah.
Okay, good. So
You've
we're
already
squared
changed it
away.
on the 19th.
Oh, okay, great, great, great. Yeah, that's usually I like to try to establish the meetings at the beginning of the year so we can protect those dates. So, okay, I guess we
It
did.
is already on there.
Okay, great. Okay, sometimes I don't remember.
Well, good luck.
Thank you.
It's nice meeting you. Good luck tomorrow. Hope it goes well. And hope your trip back to New Orleans goes well.
Thank you so much.
Are you going back Sunday or?
Tomorrow,
Oh, you after the meeting tomorrow?
yeah,
Oh, okay, all right.
at a late flight, I think my flight's at 5.
Four something.
Well, let me know if there's anything I need to do or whatever, so.
Oh, but definitely, definitely. And if you just get a chance to stop in tomorrow, please do. I don't know how long we'll last. You know, we set the place aside for about 4 hours, but you know, depending on the outcome, we might only be there 2 hours or so. It just depends. You told 12:30. Okay, so 2.5 hours. All right, we're good. But thank you for coming. Glad you could make it.
Nice
Okay,
meeting you.
can I ask you something real quick?
Yeah.
All right.
See you again.
All right.
Speak out too, since he needs me to
Mr.
share.
Chair.
Okay, yeah, we got a little bit
Wind it down.
more. Wind it down? Okay.
I'm gonna stop the recording,
Oh, you want me to stop recording?
unless y'all, I thought we were done.
I think we're good. Let's see here. Ready? No, start recording.